His past self whispered through his thoughts. The harsh brutality of the northern sea meant nothing to Baek Jung-hyuk. No frozen wasteland could contain his will. But in his current life, seated on a different throne in a different world, Roman faced a different calculation entirely. The question wasn't whether he could act, it was whether he should. His attention shifted to the present crisis before him. From the moment Kaden had arrived speaking of orcs threatening the Luna Kingdom, Roman knew this threat couldn't be ignored. Dimitri's future depended on securing alliances and demonstrating strength. Yet Roman was no fool. He had no intention of throwing lives away recklessly. There was no need for excessive risk when careful planning could achieve the same result. Roman's decision crystallized. He would accept Kaden's proposal, but on his own terms. His gaze fell upon the Luna Kingdom's envoy, still kneeling before his throne in desperate supplication. Roman's voice rang out clear and commanding as he laid out his conditions. First, in exchange for Dimitri's military intervention, the Luna Kingdom would submit to become a vassal state under Dimitri's rule. Kaden's eyes widened in shock, his body tensing at the demand. But Roman wasn't finished. The second condition was equally non-negotiable. If there existed no swift route across the endless mountains, then the entire proposal would be rejected outright. Time was the essential factor. Speed would determine whether this alliance had any value at all. Without pausing for Kaden's response, Roman turned to address his own people. His eyes found Felix, the blonde mage standing among his trusted advisors. Roman's question was direct and practical. How many soldiers could they transport at once using teleportation scrolls? Felix bowed respectfully before delivering his answer with professional precision. Given their current magical technology and resources, 30 people represented the absolute maximum capacity for a single teleportation. Roman absorbed this information and immediately announced his third and final condition. Only 30 warriors, including himself, would depart for the frozen land of Arcadia. The number was final, the decision absolute. Kaden's mind reeled. Only 30 soldiers against tens of thousands of orcs. The number seemed impossibly small, almost insultingly inadequate. Doubt crept through his thoughts like poison. But then he remembered Queen Isabel's unwavering faith. She had spoken of Roman Dimitri with reverence, describing him as a being who had transcended the limits of ordinary humanity. She believed that even if Roman accomplished nothing more than slaying the orc champion Grar, his intervention would justify any cost. That memory rekindled Kaden's conviction. He pressed his forehead to the ground, overwhelmed with gratitude. His voice trembled as he thanked Roman repeatedly. Roman cut through the sentiment with characteristic directness, demanding the route to the Luna Kingdom and the operational plan. Still kneeling, Kaden explained the logistics. His people had already established one-time teleportation coordinates along a route over the endless mountains. Using these magical waypoints, they could reach Arcadia in approximately 1 week. But then Kaden's expression darkened as he delivered a grave warning. The cold of Arcadia was beyond anything most people could comprehend or survive. He outlined the necessary preparations in detail. First, travelers would need to consume a specialized alchemical compound developed by Luna Kingdom scholars to help their bodies adapt to the extreme temperatures. After that, a full week of acclimatization training in the snow would be required before anyone could safely attempt the final crossing into Arcadia's heart. Roman rose from his throne, his movement sudden and decisive. He rejected the offer immediately. Dimitri will handle those preparations independently, he stated flatly. Kaden's composure broke. He protested desperately, explaining that Arcadia's cold was so severe it could freeze even a master swordsman's aura solid. What Roman was suggesting bordered on suicide, but Roman's expression remained completely unfazed, radiating absolute confidence. His response was simple and final. I will ensure Dimitri's forces are prepared on my end. He turned his back and began walking away, signaling the discussion's end. Over his shoulder, he confirmed the timeline. Departure in 1 week as originally planned. Kaden could only watch him leave, thinking that Roman was being dangerously overconfident. Despite his severe reservations, Kaden had no choice but to accept the command. He voiced his understanding and offered his unconditional support, pledging to provide any assistance Roman might require. The scene shifted away from Dimitri's stark military halls to a place of breathtaking beauty. The Luna Kingdom was built around an ancient tree of colossal proportions, its architecture flowing organically from the massive trunk and branches. The city gleamed under clear blue skies, a jewel of civilization in the frozen north. This was where the battle for Arcadia's future would soon begin. Inside the royal chambers, a magical communication crystal dimmed as the connection ended. A man in pristine white robes sighed heavily, accepting the inevitable before wishing Caden a safe journey. Beside him, another figure stood in disbelief. Only 30 people. Dalsum, he repeated, unable to process the absurdly small number. The man in white robes was revealed to be High Priest Sebastian, one of Luna Kingdom's highest-ranking officials. He confirmed the number with weary acceptance. Dimitri had made this choice while fully understanding the risks involved. With the decision now final, Sebastian's focus shifted to immediate concerns. He declared that Dimitri's forces would arrive in 2 weeks. Until that moment, Luna Kingdom had one singular mission: hold the fortress at all costs. As Sebastian walked purposefully through the halls, a knight rushed up from behind, calling out urgently. The knight, named Gyro, protested vehemently. With only 30 soldiers, how could they possibly face tens of thousands of orcs? As the renowned swordsman of the snowfield, Gyro believed that if this was the extent of their reinforcements, the Luna Kingdom needed to take matters into their own hands. Clenching his fist in frustration, Gyro declared passionately that they couldn't entrust Luna's entire future to Roman Dimitri alone. They were the only human nation in Arcadia, the guardians of this territory for countless generations. Their pride and history demanded they take action, but Sebastian cut through Gyro's patriotic fervor with brutal honesty. Face reality, Gyro, he stated firmly. Luna Kingdom's strength alone was insufficient to repel tens of thousands of orcs. Gyro refused to accept this assessment. He argued they couldn't simply wait passively for Dimitri's reinforcements. They needed to be proactive, to create an opportunity to eliminate the enemy in a single decisive strike. Fired up with determination, Gyro volunteered himself for the vanguard. His passion proved contagious, and other knights began cheering in agreement, ready to defeat the orcs through their own strength. Watching this display, High Priest Sebastian released a long, weary sigh. He relented with a challenge. What specific method did Gyro propose to use against the orcs? The scene transitioned to the harsh frozen landscape near Luna Kingdom's 6th storage outpost. Gyro stood alone on a snowy peak, wind whipping around his armored form. With grim determination burning in his eyes, he surveyed the desolate terrain and made a solemn vow. This is where you'll be buried, Grar. His plan was ruthlessly clever. The route the orc army was using for their advance happened to overlap with territory claimed by the equally hostile snowmen tribes. Gyro intended to provoke a conflict between these two monstrous races, letting them destroy each other. The snowmen were terrifying creatures, standing over 3 meters tall, covered in thick white fur, possessing monstrous strength capable of overwhelming even powerful orcs in single combat. Gyro understood perfectly that a single small snowman tribe stood no chance against an orc army numbering in the tens of thousands. But he didn't need the snowmen to win. He only needed them to fight. His strategy was brutally simple. Let the two forces grind each other down through attrition. Then, when both sides were weakened and exhausted, the Luna Kingdom would step in to finish the survivors. As Gyro's plan went into motion, the sounds of battle erupted across the snowfield. A massive snowman roared as a pack of orcs swarmed around it, weapons flashing. The brutal conflict was already underway, exactly as planned. The orcs were thrown into confusion by the surprise attack. One orc warrior screamed a frantic warning about enemy snowmen appearing from the blizzard. The snowfield erupted into a full-scale brawl between the two monstrous races. From his concealed position at a safe distance, Gyro watched the chaos he had orchestrated with satisfaction. He calculated that if he triggered an avalanche now, he could deal with both forces simultaneously. But as he clenched his fist ready to give the signal, he suddenly hesitated. Something felt wrong. Through the swirling snow, a new figure appeared on the battlefield. An enormous orc clad in thick furs rode atop a massive black wolf, approaching the chaos with complete calm and confidence. The wolf-riding orc, Grar himself, let out a menacing grin, his red eyes glowing with predatory intelligence. Gyro's confidence shattered instantly. No way, he thought, his face becoming a mask of pure shock. His carefully laid plan was falling apart. One of his hidden men shouted in panic that they'd been discovered. Enemy orcs were surrounding their position. Before Gyro could react, another massive orc wearing a white fur cloak appeared directly before him, looking down with utter disdain. The orc scoffed mockingly. Just as expected, humans relying on petty tricks. Orcs swarmed from every direction, effortlessly scaling the icy cliffs and surrounding Gyro's position with terrifying efficiency. The hunter had become the hunted. Gritting his teeth in frustration, Gyro could only curse his situation. The horrifying truth crashed down upon him as he realized his clever strategy had been turned completely against him. Was I the one who fell into the trap? Oh, he thought in disbelief. The scene flashed back to the day of departure. Inside a Dmitri courtyard under gray skies, Roman's chosen forces stood in perfect formation. 29 soldiers clad in black armor were assembled in disciplined silence. At their head stood their leader, Roman Dmitri himself, the 30th and final member of the expedition force. Watching from the castle walls, a silver-haired man let out a massive yawn, though even he had to admit these warriors all looked exceptionally strong. Caden observed from nearby. Completely stunned, he couldn't believe Dmitri possessed warriors of this caliber. He felt an overwhelming pressure emanating from them, comparable to the 3 legendary swordsmen of the Luna Kingdom. The narrative introduced Luna Kingdom's greatest champions. First was Leo, the Royal Knights commander, whose powerful aura was immediately apparent to anyone with combat experience. Second was Gyro, the swordsman of the snowfield, a warrior as fierce and relentless as the blizzards he navigated. Third was Caden himself, known as the White Flying Squirrel, whose speed and agility were unmatched throughout the kingdom. Caden acknowledged that aside from these 3 legendary figures, he was considered one of the top swordsmen in the entire Luna Kingdom. But that confidence wavered as he studied Dmitri's soldiers more carefully. Their power was palpable, radiating from them like heat from a forge. A troubling question formed in his mind as he assessed them honestly. How many of these warriors could he actually defeat in single combat? Caden's doubt evaporated, replaced by a stunning realization that left him breathless. With warriors of this exceptional caliber, he thought with widening eyes, even 30 soldiers might genuinely be enough to turn the tide against tens of thousands of orcs. And leading this elite force was the strongest swordsman among them all, Roman Dmitri himself. He stood before his assembled warriors, his crimson cape flowing in the wind, exuding an aura of absolute power and unshakable confidence that made even legendary fighters feel small in comparison. Overwhelmed by the display of concentrated military might, Caden bowed low before Roman Dmitri with genuine respect. "I will guide the way," he offered, his voice filled with reverence. Without needing to be told or compelled, he naturally showed the proper courtesy due to a true superior. The scene snapped back violently to the present, to the brutal reality of the snowy battlefield. Gyro's face was crushed under the heavy boot of an orc warrior, blood foaming from his mouth. His brilliant plan had failed utterly and completely. Grar stood over him victoriously, holding a massive battle axe, while the rest of the orc army surrounded them. Their victory was absolute and crushing. Grar surveyed the battlefield as snow continued to fall, his expression one of supreme satisfaction. It was a devastating defeat for Luna Kingdom's forces. The narrator's voice concluded grimly. It seemed Luna Kingdom's long and proud history might end on this frozen field, crushed under the heel of an orc invasion. The endless mountains lived up to their name, an unforgiving expanse of white death stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Roman Dmitri and his 30 elite warriors tore through the blizzard like shadows given form, their black armor cutting stark contrast against the pristine snow. Leading them was Caden, the White Flying Squirrel, whose intimate knowledge of these treacherous peaks was their only advantage against the mountain's merciless terrain. The wind shrieked around them with primal fury, as if the mountain itself objected to their passage. Caden glanced backward, and what he saw defied every expectation he'd held. Roman and his soldiers weren't just keeping pace. They moved with an efficiency that seemed almost supernatural. The technique they employed was unmistakably Arcadian in origin, a specialized movement style that distributed weight across unstable surfaces. But Caden had never taught them this. The bewilderment in his mind grew sharper with each passing moment. How had they mastered something so complex without instruction? The question gnawed at him even as they pressed forward through conditions that would have killed ordinary men. The magical communication device in Caden's hand suddenly flared to life, its glow cutting through the swirling snow. The voice that emerged was tight with barely controlled panic. "Caden, we have a crisis." His heart seized in his chest as he demanded answers. The report that followed painted a nightmare in words. Gyro, one of Luna Kingdom's legendary 3 swordsmen, had launched an ambitious surprise assault on the orc forces. But ambition had turned to catastrophe. The orcs had anticipated his move perfectly. Gyro's entire strike force had been annihilated, and his own fate remained unknown. The voice continued with even grimmer news. Grar himself, The monstrous orc warlord was now personally leading his horde in a direct assault on Luna Fortress. At their current speed, the fortress would fall under siege hours before Roman's reinforcements could possibly arrive. Caden's grip on the communication device tightened until his knuckles went white. Fury and frustration warred within him. He'd explicitly warned Gyro against reckless action. This was supposed to be a straightforward 2-week support mission. Now everything was collapsing. Through gritted teeth, Caden made a promise he wasn't certain he could keep. "Hold the line. Whatever it takes, we're coming." He snapped the device shut and turned to Roman, his expression carved from stone. The situation had escalated beyond worst-case scenarios. Luna Fortress lay a full day's journey ahead under normal circumstances. Caden's voice carried the weight of desperation as he addressed Roman. They would need to push beyond human limits, moving at absolute maximum speed to have any chance of arriving in time. Without waiting for acknowledgement, Caden announced he would guide them along the shortest possible route. A path so dangerous that most travelers avoided it even in favorable conditions. Then, almost as an afterthought born from doubt, he added that anyone who grew exhausted should call out immediately. It was a concession to what he assumed would be the limitations of outsiders in this brutal environment. But as Caden launched forward with everything he had, that red and black figure matched his every movement with seemingly effortless grace. Something impossible caught Caden's attention as he pushed his body to its absolute limits. Roman Dmitri moved across the snow without leaving a single footprint. The snow remained pristine behind him, as though he weighed nothing at all, or perhaps as though the mountain itself refused to acknowledge his presence. This technique didn't exist anywhere in Arcadian martial traditions. It represented a mastery over one's physical form that transcended anything Caden had witnessed in his decades of experience. A spark of hope ignited in Caden's chest, despite the dire circumstances. At this unprecedented pace, they might actually reach Luna Kingdom before nightfall. The impossible distance was shrinking with every heartbeat. But that fragile hope shattered moments later, when the communication device blazed to life once more. The report was stark and terrible. Enemy forces had been sighted approaching Luna Fortress. The voice on the other end announced what everyone feared. The battle for survival had begun. Caden shouted encouragement across the magical connection, promising they would arrive soon, begging his people to hold just a little longer. But as the words left his mouth, the transmission began to falter. Static invaded the channel, a telltale sign of enemy interference. Someone on the orc side possessed magical capabilities strong enough to jam their communications. Through the crackling disruption, a voice broke through one final time. The words hit Caden like physical blows. The fortress was lost. He should abandon Luna and save himself. At least one of them might survive. The transmission died with a final burst of static, leaving Caden staring at the dark crystal in his hand. The silence that followed felt louder than the screaming wind. His homeland, his people, his entire world, all of it was dying while he raced helplessly through the snow. Roman remained silent beside him, but somehow that silence felt more reassuring than any words could have been. Inside a darkened war tent stinking of blood and worse things, a Luna Kingdom soldier knelt before Grar's imposing throne. The man was barely recognizable as human anymore. Torture had stripped away his dignity, his strength, and ultimately his loyalty. Blood matted his hair and clothes, and fresh wounds still wept across his broken body. Under the crushing weight of agony, he'd surrendered every secret he possessed. His voice, raw from screaming, revealed everything about Roman Dmitri and the Dmitri Kingdom's alliance with Luna. The truly damning information spilled out next. The reinforcements numbered only 30 warriors. To the orcs, this seemed laughably inadequate. The soldier explained through broken sobs that this pathetic number was why Lord Gyro had attempted his desperate gambit, hoping to eliminate the threat through Luna's own strength before reinforcements even arrived. Around the tent, the consequences of resistance were displayed with brutal clarity. Other captured soldiers hung from posts, their bodies bearing testament to orcish cruelty. Some were still alive, suspended in positions that ensured maximum suffering. The broken soldier begged for his life, with what remained of his voice. When he realized mercy wasn't coming, his plea changed to something even more desperate, a request for a death without pain. Grar studied the pathetic creature before him with cold calculation. The name Roman Dmitri meant nothing to him. More importantly, 30 reinforcements represented no threat whatsoever to his overwhelming numerical advantage. He turned to his lieutenant, Kolot, and inquired about the status of Luna Fortress. Kolot responded with predatory satisfaction. They were moments away from shattering the divine barrier protecting the fortress. But Grar had grown tired of waiting. The scent of fear wafting from the fortress walls was too intoxicating to ignore any longer. He rose from his throne with terrible finality, announcing his personal involvement. When Grar the Destroyer took the field, battles didn't last long. He emerged from his tent into the swirling snow, and his army erupted with bloodthirsty cheers. The roar was deafening, a sound that promised death and devastation. Thousands of orc warriors surged forward in his wake, a tide of violence that nothing seemed capable of stopping. From the battlements of Luna Fortress, the defenders watched Grar's approach with mounting horror. The orc warlord was a mountain of muscle and malice, and the crimson aura surrounding him was visible even through the blizzard. It pulsed with murderous intent, a physical manifestation of his desire to kill. The soldiers cursed and shouted in frustration and fear. This monster of legend was finally making his move, and they all knew what it meant. Grar drew the massive blade from his back, a weapon that seemed too large for any creature to wield effectively. The red aura intensified around him until it distorted the very air. High Priest Sebastian appeared on the walls, his white robes billowing in the wind. His voice rang out with desperate authority, commanding his priests to pour their divine power into the protective barrier. They responded immediately, their combined faith manifesting as a shimmering golden dome over the fortress. Sebastian knew this barrier represented their only hope. If it fell, every man, woman, and child inside would be slaughtered. The priests chanted in unison, channeling their life force itself into maintaining the shield. Grar approached the barrier with casual confidence. He raised his colossal blade and swung with devastating force. The impact created an explosion of light that momentarily outshone the sun. The shockwave rippled outward, shattering ice formations and sending snow cascading down the mountainside. The golden barrier held, but barely. Spiderweb cracks spread across its surface like frozen lightning. Sebastian felt the divine energy draining from his body at an alarming rate. Sweat poured down his face despite the freezing temperature as he poured more power into the failing barrier. His lips moved in frantic prayer, begging their god for strength to endure just a little longer. But before the cracks could even begin to heal, Grar launched himself into the air with impossible agility for something so massive. His blade came down like judgment itself, and he roared a taunting question. Did they really think they could stop him without Isabel? So the name carried weight in history, but there was no time to dwell on it. Sebastian looked up at the descending blade and understood with perfect clarity that their doom had arrived. The barrier couldn't withstand another blow. The blade struck. The barrier shattered like glass. What followed was beyond description. Luna Fortress, that beautiful testament to human resilience in the frozen north, became a charnel house. The ancient tree at its center burned despite the snow, flames consuming its sacred branches. Orcs poured through the broken gates like a flood of green-skinned death. They killed indiscriminately. Soldiers, priests, civilians, children. No one was spared their savagery. The screams echoed through the mountain passes, a symphony of suffering that would haunt these peaks for generations. The orcs didn't just kill, they feasted. The fortress had become a grotesque banquet hall where the strong devoured the weak in the most literal sense possible. Kolot moved through the carnage with purpose, seeking out survivors for a specific task. He needed bait. He grabbed a terrified soldier and dragged him toward the outer walls. The trap needed to be believable, which meant it needed authentic suffering. Kolot's twisted intelligence had crafted the perfect snare for the approaching reinforcements. Word reached Kolot that figures were approaching through the blizzard. He turned his yellow eyes toward the snowy horizon and spotted them, Roman Dmitri and his warriors. A cruel smile split his face. The plan was falling into place perfectly. He shoved his captive soldier forward and pressed a jagged blade against the man's throat. The instructions were brutally simple. The soldier would call out to the approaching forces, pretending the fortress still stood. He would lure them close to the walls. If he succeeded, Kolot promised to spare both him and his family. It was a transparent lie, but the broken man had nothing left except desperate hope. He agreed with hollow eyes. Hidden throughout the fortress, thousands of orc warriors waited in ambush positions, concealed by the smoke and falling snow. The stage was set for a massacre. On the ramparts, the captive soldier stood alone, or seemed to. Behind him, orcs wearing stolen cloaks hunched their massive frames to appear human from a distance. The illusion was crude but effective in the poor visibility. Through the blizzard, Roman Dimitri's figure emerged with his elite force behind him. The captive soldier's voice cracked as he shouted the scripted words. "Halt! This is Luna territory." The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. Roman came to an immediate stop, his boot planted firmly in the snow. his cold eyes fixed on the lone figure above with unsettling intensity. The soldier continued his desperate charade, demanding they identify themselves. Behind him, hidden in the smoke and shadows, thousands of orcs waited with weapons ready. The trap was sprung. The only question remaining was whether Roman Dmitri would walk into it, or whether he'd already seen through the deception. Roman stood motionless in the falling snow, his expression unreadable. The fortress burned behind the ramparts, but his focus remained absolute. Whatever happened next would determine not just the fate of 30 warriors, but the future of an entire kingdom. The blizzard continued to fall, indifferent to the human drama unfolding beneath its frozen curtain. This was the moment where legends were either born or buried in unmarked graves. The blizzard raged with merciless intensity, transforming the world into a swirling chaos of white and gray. Through the violent snowfall, Roman Dmitri stood like a monument carved from iron, utterly unmoved by the elements that would have broken lesser men. The guard's challenge hung in the frozen air, demanding identification from the strangers who dared approach Luna Fortress in its darkest hour. Roman drew a breath that seemed to pull the very cold into his lungs, then released it as a thunderous proclamation that cut through the howling wind like a blade through silk. His voice carried power that transcended mere volume. "I am Roman Dmitri, Lord of the Dmitri Kingdom." The words resonated with such authority that even the stone walls seemed to tremble. The declaration wasn't a request for entry, it was an announcement of inevitability. Behind those massive gates, countless souls huddled in terror, clinging to hope that had grown dangerously thin. They heard that voice pierce through their despair like the first ray of dawn breaking an endless night. The guard stationed above peered down through the relentless snowfall, his vision obscured by the weather and his growing confusion. His armor creaked as he leaned forward, trying to reconcile what he saw with what he'd been told to expect. Luna had been promised 30 reinforcements from Dmitri, warriors who would turn the tide against the overwhelming orc invasion. But the reality before him seemed like a cruel mockery of those promises. Only 3 figures stood in the snow below, their forms barely visible through the white curtain of the storm. The guard's voice carried a mixture of desperation and suspicion as he called down his question. "The reports said 30 would come. Why do I see only 3? It was a reasonable inquiry that concealed deeper fears. 3 warriors against the thousands of orcs that had shattered their divine barriers and slaughtered their defenders seemed like an insult worse than abandonment. The guard's next question came tinged with desperate hope. Was Lord Caden among them? Perhaps their own champion had returned with these mysterious reinforcements. What the guard couldn't see from his elevated position was the trap that had been meticulously prepared below. Scattered throughout the courtyard and concealed by strategic positioning, orc warriors waited with weapons ready. They had draped themselves in stolen cloaks and positioned themselves to appear as Luna defenders from a distance. Their breathing was controlled despite their savage nature, fingers trembling with anticipation on weapon hilts. The trap had been set with cunning intelligence. Lure the reinforcements close to the walls, then spring the ambush when escape became impossible. Every orc eye fixed on those 3 vulnerable humans standing exposed in the open courtyard. But Roman Dmitri had already seen through the deception. His hand moved with deliberate purpose to the sword at his waist. The sound of steel sliding free from its scabbard rang out clear, despite the howling wind, a sound that promised violence and judgment in equal measure. He stood before Luna's gates not as a supplicant seeking entry, but as a conqueror claiming what was already his by right. His next words would shatter whatever remained of the old order. Roman's voice cut through the storm with absolute finality. Luna Kingdom has become a vassal state of Dmitri. It wasn't a proposal or a negotiation, it was a statement of accomplished fact. To prove his authority, he raised his hand high, displaying the medallion that Caden had entrusted to him. The emblem caught what little light penetrated the gray storm clouds, gleaming with unmistakable legitimacy. This was no theft or forgery. This was the genuine article, marking him as Luna's rightful superior. His gaze swept upward to the guards manning the walls, his eyes burning with intensity that transcended the physical storm. From this moment forward, the people of Luna answer to me alone. The declaration carried implications that reached far beyond mere military alliance. Sovereignty itself was being transferred in the midst of a war zone, with enemy forces literally hidden among them. Then his tone shifted, taking on a quality that bordered on sacred oath. "Swear your loyalty to me, and I will not abandon you. I will fight until my last breath to ensure every single one of you survives this nightmare." Inside the fortress where captive civilians had been bound and corralled by their orc captors, those words penetrated through stone and snow alike. Mothers who had lost all hope felt something stir in their hearts, something they'd thought dead. Old men who had resigned themselves to becoming orc meals lifted their faces from the ground, tears mixing with the grime on their weathered cheeks. Children stopped their quiet sobbing and listened to that voice promising salvation. Roman's conviction wasn't just audible, it was tangible, a force that pushed back against the despair that had consumed them. But the orcs had been listening too. Kolat, the cunning lieutenant commanding the ambush force, felt alarm bells ringing in his mind. Something in Roman's bearing, in the purple flicker beginning to manifest in the human's eyes, warned him that the trap was about to turn catastrophic. His voice erupted in a guttural command that shook the very air. Attack! I'd kill them now. But the order came a heartbeat too late. Roman moved faster than thought itself. Before Khalat's words could fully register with his troops, the human lord was already channeling power that defied natural law. His eyes blazed with brilliant purple light, the unmistakable signature of the heavenly demon sword art. The air itself seemed to warp and scream as concentrated energy gathered around his blade. For one impossible moment, the snowfall itself seemed to freeze in place, suspended by the sheer magnitude of power being unleashed. The first form tore through reality with apocalyptic force. Roman's blade swept toward the massive fortress gates in an arc that carried the weight of divine judgment. The reinforced iron that had withstood countless sieges simply ceased to exist. The stone walls flanking the entrance, structures that had been built to last centuries, exploded into dust and fragments. The shockwave alone sent orcs tumbling through the air like children's toys. In a single devastating instant, Roman had erased the boundary between outside and inside, transforming the fortress's primary defensive position into a gaping wound. Even as debris was still falling from his catastrophic attack, Roman's voice rang out with tactical precision. Chris, Kevin. His trusted warriors immediately locked onto his words despite the chaos erupting around them. Your mission is to locate and extract the prisoners. Do not expect safety. We are outnumbered 1,000 to 3. His honesty was brutal but necessary. There was no room for illusions in this slaughterhouse. Your only objective is to kill everything standing between you and those captives. Show no mercy because you will receive none. Both men responded with immediate acknowledgement, their own combat auras flaring to life like twin stars igniting in the darkness. Chris's energy manifested as a brilliant gold that seemed to burn away the very shadows. Kevin's aura pulsed with deep crimson intensity. Without hesitation or fear, they charged forward into the heart of enemy territory where thousands of orcs waited. Their faces showed no doubt, only the grim determination of warriors who had absolute faith in their commander's plan. The scene shifted backward through time, pulling away from the violence to a quieter moment heavy with grief. After receiving confirmation that Luna Fortress had fallen to the orcish invasion, Caden had stood before Roman with the expression of a man attending his own funeral. The characteristic light in his eyes, the fire that had defined him as one of Luna's legendary champions, had been extinguished completely. Only a hollow emptiness remained where pride and purpose once dwelled. His voice was steady but lifeless as he delivered his farewell. The fortress has fallen. Luna is lost. Each word seemed to cost him physically, as though speaking them carved pieces from his soul. He looked at Roman with gratitude mixed with profound sorrow. I can no longer ask you to remain here. Thank you for coming all this way from your homeland. Your willingness to help will not be forgotten, even if there's no Luna Kingdom left to remember it. Caden bowed deeply, his forehead nearly touching his knees in a gesture of absolute respect and finality. I apologize that we cannot repay your kindness. This was our fight, not yours. His eyes had gone dead, reflecting the corpse of hope. In his mind, asking warriors from another nation to die for Luna's mistakes was unconscionable. The only honorable path remaining was to part ways here, allowing Roman to return home safely while Caden marched alone to join his fallen kingdom in death. But Roman's expression remained as unmoved as mountain stone. No pity softened his features. No fear flickered in his gaze. He looked at Caden with the cold clarity of someone who saw the absolute truth of a situation. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of immutable law. From the moment Dimitri formed an alliance with Luna, your kingdom became our vassal state. The fate of that vassal is no longer yours to decide. It belongs to Dimitri. You no longer possess the authority to surrender or retreat. The logic was ruthlessly absolute. By accepting Dimitri's protection and resources, Luna had surrendered its right to give up. Roman would not permit his investment to simply collapse because its people had lost hope. His expression hardened further as he issued his command. Tell me everything about the fortress. Floor plans, guard positions, enemy numbers, structural weaknesses, hidden passages, every detail you possess. Now. Caden's dead eyes flickered with something resembling shock. That small spark of renewed life was enough to break through his despair. His voice gained strength as he began describing his homeland in minute detail, providing information that would have been considered treasonous under any other circumstances. But Luna was already fallen. What did secrets matter to the dead? Together they crafted a strategy that bordered on suicidal. A pincer operation utilizing Luna's secret passages would split their already minimal forces into two groups facing overwhelming odds. The main element, 27 of Dimitri's elite soldiers led by Caden himself, would navigate the treacherous mountain paths to reach a hidden cave entrance. This group would infiltrate deep into the fortress's interior, using passages known only to Luna's highest-ranking defenders. Meanwhile, Roman would lead Chris and Kevin in a frontal assault on the main gate. 3 men would draw the attention of thousands, becoming bait so obvious that no orc commander could resist committing forces to crush them. The plan required perfect timing, absolute trust, and a level of individual combat capability that bordered on mythical. Caden led the main infiltration force through passages carved into the mountain itself centuries ago. Their torches cast dancing shadows against damp stone walls that dripped with melted snow. The narrow tunnel forced them into single file, their breathing and equipment creating a rhythmic echo that threatened to give away their position. Anxiety gnawed at Caden despite his best efforts to project confidence. He glanced back at the Dimitri soldiers following in disciplined silence and asked the question that had been eating at him. "Do you truly believe this plan can succeed?" The response came without hesitation from the soldier directly behind him. "Of course it will succeed." The answer was delivered with such complete certainty, such utter absence of doubt, that it silenced Caden's fears more effectively than any reassurance could have. He studied these men more carefully, seeing past their armor to the absolute conviction in their eyes. They didn't hope their commander's plan would work. They knew it would. That level of unwavering faith spoke to something profound about Roman Dimitri's leadership. Caden's thoughts turned philosophical as they pressed deeper into the mountain. Luna needed exactly this kind of leader. Someone who inspired such absolute loyalty that doubt became impossible. Perhaps surrendering sovereignty to Dimitri wasn't the tragedy he'd initially believed. If this was the caliber of warriors Dimitri's system produced, then Luna would be safer as a vassal than it had ever been as an independent kingdom desperately clinging to fading glory. The tunnel suddenly widened, and Caden's practiced eye caught movement ahead. 2 orc scouts wandered through the cave system, their ugly features twisted in confusion as they processed the unexpected sight of intruders. Before Caden could even reach for his weapon or shout a warning, 2 Dimitri soldiers exploded into motion with predatory grace. The orcs didn't stand a chance. Before they could bellow an alarm or raise their weapons, blades found their throats with surgical precision. The kills were silent, efficient, and absolutely merciless. Both bodies crumpled to the cave floor without ceremony. Caden stood frozen in shock. He'd fought orcs his entire adult life and knew intimately how dangerous they were. Their thick hides could turn aside poorly aimed strikes. Their berserker strength could shatter shields and bones alike. Yet these Dimitri soldiers had dispatched them as easily as cutting wheat. The speed, the accuracy, the complete absence of wasted motion. It spoke to training that transcended anything Luna's military academies could produce. As they pressed forward through the tunnels, systematically eliminating every orc patrol they encountered, Caden's understanding underwent a fundamental transformation. When he'd first heard that Dimitri was sending only 30 reinforcements, he'd felt insulted. 30 men against thousands seemed like a joke, a token gesture that would accomplish nothing but add 30 more corpses to the pile. But now, watching these warriors move through the darkness like shadows given lethal purpose, he understood the terrible truth. These weren't ordinary soldiers. Each one of them was worth 100 normal warriors. The infiltration group moved with mechanical efficiency, executing orcs before the creatures could raise an alarm. Their blades found vital points with unerring accuracy even in the dim torchlight. Caden felt something he hadn't experienced in days, genuine hope. Not the desperate fantasy of a drowning man, but the solid confidence born from witnessing undeniable capability. He whispered a prayer to gods he'd nearly lost faith in, thanking them for sending Roman Dimitri when Luna needed salvation most desperately. Back at the shattered main gate, the situation had evolved into pure chaos. Kolot had screamed orders for his troops to overwhelm the 3 humans through sheer numbers. The mathematics seemed undeniable. Thousands against 3 could only end one way. The orcish horde surged forward like a tsunami of green flesh and rusted iron, their collective roar shaking the very foundations of the mountain. The ground trembled under the weight of so many charging bodies converging on a single point. But Roman Dimitri stood immovable, a pillar of defiance against the incoming tide. His blade swept in a devastating horizontal arc, and reality itself seemed to buckle under the force. A shockwave of pure kinetic energy erupted outward, sending dozens of orcs tumbling through the air like leaves caught in a hurricane. The purple aura surrounding Roman intensified until he appeared to be wreathed in dark flames that consumed everything they touched. He moved through the orcish ranks like death incarnate, each strike finding a throat, each movement ending a life. The orcs fought with berserk abandon, driven by bloodlust and their commander's orders. They trampled over their own fallen comrades in their desperation to reach the human who was carving through their ranks. An orc champion swung a massive battle axe toward Roman's head with enough force to split a boulder. Roman didn't bother blocking or parrying. He simply wasn't there when the weapon arrived, his body flowing around the attack like water around stone. Then he used the orc's own weapon as a stepping stone, launching himself upward to deliver a killing strike before his enemy even understood what had happened. Roman channeled even greater power into his blade, his purple aura intensifying to blinding brilliance. The heavenly demon sword art's second form manifested with apocalyptic force. For one heartbeat, the entire battlefield seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the destruction about to be unleashed. Then, the world exploded. A massive detonation of concentrated energy tore through the earth itself, creating a crater that swallowed dozens of orcs instantly. Boulders the size of houses were thrown hundreds of feet into the air along with broken bodies. The snow vaporized in a radius around the blast, exposing scorched earth beneath. The surviving orcs finally showed genuine fear. The berserker rage that had driven them forward evaporated, replaced by primal terror. They had conquered kingdoms and devoured armies, but they had never faced anything like this. Their voices cracked as they screamed the only word that could describe what they were witnessing. Monster. But before they could flee or even finish their panicked cries, Chris and Kevin were among them, their own combat prowess creating a slaughter that complemented Roman's destruction perfectly. Orcs stationed on the fortress wall suddenly realized they had enemies in both directions. They turned to find Dimitri's soldiers emerging from the fortress's interior. Caden's infiltration force had successfully reached their objective. The soldiers moved with cold precision, cutting through orcs who had thought themselves safe behind the walls. The pincer operation had worked exactly as planned. The enemy was now caught between two forces of overwhelming individual capability. Kolat stood in the middle of the chaos, his tactical mind finally grasping the full horror of their situation. They had underestimated Dimitri catastrophically. What they'd assumed was a weak human kingdom was actually something far more dangerous. His 10,000 warriors were being systematically annihilated by 30. The humiliation transcended military defeat. It was an existential crisis that shattered everything the orcs believed about their own superiority. Desperation drove Kalat to his final gambit. He screamed for the shaman, and from the center of the orcish formation, a withered creature draped in bones and fetishes hobbled forward. The shaman's voice rose in a high-pitched rhythmic chant that seemed to rot the very air it touched. Dark energy pulsed outward in waves, infecting every orc it touched with corrupting power. Their eyes turned blood red, glowing with unnatural light. Their consciousness fled, replaced by magical compulsion that stripped away everything except the drive to kill. The transformed orcs became something worse than soldiers. They became weapons with no off switch. Pain meant nothing to them. An orc missing an arm continued fighting with the other, its face showing no recognition of the injury. Another creature with its guts spilling onto the snow simply held them in with one hand while swinging its weapon with the other. They had transcended fear and pain, becoming extensions of the shaman's dark will. One of these magically enhanced orcs, despite having sustained mortal wounds, rose from where it had fallen. Its eyes burned with that terrible red glow as it spotted Kevin engaged in combat with 3 other enemies. The creature grabbed its massive axe and hurled it with remaining strength. The weapon spun through the air in a deadly arc, aimed directly at Kevin's unprotected back. The whistling sound was barely audible over the battle's chaos, and Kevin was completely focused on the immediate threats before him. The axe flew toward his skull with lethal accuracy, promising death from an unexpected angle.
The cold wind screamed across the ruined battlefield, threading through shattered stone and broken bodies as if the land itself were mourning. Snow fell in relentless sheets, but no amount of white could hide the dark smear of blood soaking into the ground around Luna Fortress. The war had reached its peak, a symphony of roars, steel and death echoing between the jagged peaks. In the middle of that chaos, time seemed to fracture. An orc whose mind had been broken by dark magic stood behind Kevin, its eyes glowing a dull, murderous red. The creature's massive axe spun in its grip as it raised the weapon high, then hurled it like a guillotine at Kevin's unprotected back. For the young warrior, the world slowed to a crawl. He felt the weight of the incoming blow like a shadow settling over his spine, heavier and colder than the winter air. His exhausted muscles screamed, but refused to obey. He tried to twist, to duck, to raise his sword, anything, but his body felt submerged in tar. The blade cut through the air toward him. Before it reached its mark, another figure burst into that frozen moment. Steel crashed against steel with a shriek that tore through the battlefield. Sparks exploded in the swirling snow as Chris slid between Kevin and the incoming axe at impossible speed, his sword intercepting the killing blow. The impact rattled his arms and sent a spray of orange light across the grey sky, but the lethal trajectory was shattered. Boots buried in blood-stained snow, Chris held his ground like a wall of iron. He didn't even turn his head. "Don't let your guard down." His voice was calm, clipped. A simple reprimand in the middle of hell. For a heartbeat, only the orc's harsh breathing filled the space between them. Kevin stared at Chris's back, his life saved by the man he'd sworn to compete with. What should have been gratitude twisted into something darker. Shame burned through his chest, hotter than any wound. The realization that he would have died if not for Chris sliced deeper than any blade. That shame ignited. Red aura exploded around Kevin's body, flaring into a violent storm that turned falling snow into steam before it could reach his skin. Rage, humiliation, and raw frustration swirled into a crimson halo. Without answering, without acknowledging the rescue, he launched himself forward. The world blurred as he lunged at the orc, his movement fueled not by discipline, but by the desperate need to prove he was not a burden. Kevin's sword carved across the orc's chest with brutal force. The creature howled, a guttural roar ripped from its lungs as its thick hide split open. Blood poured over its torso, but Kevin was far from finished. He was no longer thinking. He was a vessel for the rage that consumed him. He leapt into the air, armor and all, his eyes blazing with a divine, almost judgmental light. At the peak of his jump, he brought his sword down with both hands, channeling every ounce of rage into the strike. The blade split the monster before it could even fall to its knees. Kevin landed hard in the snow, breath ragged, aura slowly dimming as the surge of power faded. His hands trembled from the intensity of the release. He turned toward Chris, pride and defensiveness warring across his face. "Even if you hadn't helped," he said, forcing the lie through clenched teeth. "I could have avoided that attack." They both knew it wasn't true. Kevin had felt death closing in. If Chris hadn't intervened, he would already be lying in the snow with a broken spine. But his voice was steady, stubbornly clinging to the illusion of control. Chris didn't argue. He watched the younger warrior with eyes that held neither mockery nor pity, only understanding. A faint smile tugged at his lips, the expression of a veteran who recognized the fire of a rival struggling to grow. "In that case," Chris replied lightly, "let's make it interesting. How about a bet and whoever kills more orcs wins?" Oh, it wasn't just competition. It was guidance. Instead of scolding Kevin for his recklessness, Chris redirected his frustration toward the one thing that mattered, annihilating the enemy. Kevin clicked his tongue, jaw tight. "You don't need to tell me twice." Their unspoken agreement was sealed not with words, but with the blood already soaking the snow. While their rivalry flared, the true reaper of the battlefield continued his work. Roman Dmitri moved among the orcs like a shadow carved from the storm itself. There was no wasted motion, no shouting, no theatrics. Where others stomped and slipped on frozen ground, Roman seemed to glide, his steps so light that the snow barely recorded his passing. His sword rose and fell with mechanical simplicity, one motion, one corpse. Orcs who towered over ordinary men were reduced to stumbling fools in front of him, their power meaningless against his perfect form. Each strike was precise enough to be called surgical. He didn't hack or thrash. He cut. Throats, hearts, joints. Every blow landed exactly where it needed to be. The battlefield around him was a carving, and Roman was the sculptor, calmly removing everything that did not belong. Seeing their lord's relentless advance, Kevin and Chris fell silent. Whatever petty emotions churned inside them faded away as they watched the standard they aspired to reach. Compared to that man, their rivalry was small. High above, on the battered fortress walls, the Orc commander watched the tide shift. Krat, general of the Orc forces, surveyed the carnage with growing horror. His yellow eyes locked again and again on Roman's figure, that relentless violet light cutting his army apart. Logic insisted the human should have long since exhausted his strength. No warrior, human or otherwise, could maintain that level of mana and physical output for so long. Yet Roman kept moving, kept killing, his pace unbroken. Every time the Orcs threw another wave at him, the result was the same. Bodies fell, and Roman stepped forward through the gap. The distance between Roman and the wall grew smaller with terrifying inevitability. Fear coiled in Krat's gut, cold and suffocating. The limit he'd been waiting for, the moment Roman would slow, stagger or collapse, refused to appear. Desperation gnawed at his sanity. He snarled at the shaman at his side. Use a stronger spell. The shaman began to chant, weaving a new ritual, but it was already too late. From below, a focused blast of mana and compressed air roared upward. Krat barely managed to throw himself aside as the invisible strike tore past, close enough that he felt it brush his cheek. The castle wall behind him didn't just crack, it disintegrated in a straight line, stone shredding like brittle parchment. Dust billowed. For a heartbeat, everything went still. Roman and Krat locked eyes across the distance, the human lord standing amidst a mountain of corpses, the Orc commander poised atop the wall. In that single exchange of glances, whatever remained of Krat's courage shattered. He saw no fatigue in Roman's gaze, no hesitation, only cold intent, pride shriveled, replaced by animal survival instinct. Krat turned and fled. He ran along the ramparts, boots pounding against stone, leaving his army to die behind him. To him, the fortress was already gone. The only thing left to save was his own life. While chaos devoured the walls, a different struggle unfolded in the fortress's dark veins. 27 of Dimitri's elite soldiers, who had entered through the secret tunnel, had successfully forced their way into the heart of the stronghold. Moving like phantoms in the damp, torch-lit corridors, they cut down guards and opened cells with unyielding efficiency. Chains broke, locks shattered, and one by one the prisoners realized what was happening. They were being saved. Tears flowed freely as families clung to each other, the crushing weight of hopelessness lifting at last. Cries of gratitude filled the air, people called Caden's name, blessing Dimitri and its mysterious lord. To them, these 27 warriors were not mere soldiers. They were avenging spirits, sent to drag them back from the edge of hell. But their leader did not allow emotion to cloud his judgment. The Dimitri captain in charge of the group kept his voice level as he issued orders. First squad, keep searching. There may be more prisoners in the lower cells. We don't leave anyone behind. The first group moved without hesitation, peeling away into deeper darkness. Second squad, gather everyone we've freed. We move to the main gate. Protect them at all costs. Caden stood among the rescued crowd, watching the Dimitri soldiers with something close to awe. Their discipline did not waver, even as sobbing civilians clutched at them. With only 30 men, Roman had turned a hopeless massacre into a winnable war. Caden realized he was witnessing something that future generations would call legend. An orc lunged from the shadows. Hiding behind a stack of crates, one of the surviving beasts hurled itself at Caden with a desperate roar, dagger aimed for his back. This time, Caden did not freeze. The man who had once been eaten alive by despair had been reforged on this battlefield. His sword flashed. In a single motion, Caden twisted, drew, and swung. The orc's head flew from its shoulders, thudding onto the stone a moment before the body collapsed. The attack ended as quickly as it had begun, leaving only silence and the copper scent of fresh blood. He didn't waste the moment. "Everyone, move," Caden shouted, his voice firm and commanding. "Follow Dimitri's soldiers." The civilians obeyed without question, fear giving way to desperate trust. The corridors filled with the sound of hurried footsteps as the rescued made their way toward the light. Outside, the heart of the battlefield transformed into a vision from a nightmare. Before the ruined main gate, corpses had piled so high they formed a grotesque barrier. Orc bodies and human remains lay tangled in a mound that reached almost to the splintered walls. The snow beneath had turned from white to a thick crimson slush, every step squelched with the sound of soaked leather and crushed flesh. It was less a field of battle and more a lake of blood. Near that grisly wall, Chris and Kevin leaned against the fortress stones, chests heaving with exhaustion. Their armor bore the history of the battle, dents, scratches, and streaks of dried gore. Their swords were nicked and stained, hanging loosely in their tired grips. Chris glanced sideways at Kevin, studying the younger warrior's battered form. Despite himself, he felt a grudging respect settle in his chest. The kid had pushed far beyond what many seasoned soldiers could endure. He didn't say it aloud, but the thought crossed his mind clearly. Not bad. Kevin stared at the ground, fingers twitching around his hilt. Sweat and melted snow dripped from his hair, mixing with the blood on his face. He knew he'd fought well, better than he ever had, but he also knew he'd still fallen short of Chris. The frustration was suffocating. Every ragged breath carried the bitter taste of inadequacy. Yet there was one thing they could agree on. As they lifted their eyes and looked past the sea of bodies to where Roman still stood, sword in hand, their rivalry shrank into insignificance. Roman was still moving, still cutting down any orc foolish enough to remain standing. While they leaned on the wall, he alone stood upright, a solitary pillar of power amid the carnage. Compared to their lord, both Chris and Kevin were still standing at the bottom of a mountain they hadn't even begun to climb. Their moment of reflection ended when a soldier hurried over to Roman, face tight. "Lord Dmitri, there is a problem." Roman turned his head slightly, attention shifting. His posture, his breathing, nothing about him showed the fatigue that weighed on his men. "Speak." "The Orc commander," the soldier reported. "Krat. He has barricaded himself inside a building, and he's taken prisoners as hostages." Roman's eyes narrowed as the memory resurfaced. The coward who'd fled from the wall. "Take me to him." They arrived at a structure near the inner courtyard, its entrance blocked by nervous guards and terrified survivors. In front of the sealed door stood Krat, his back pressed against the wood, one thick arm wrapped around a trembling girl. In his other hand, he clutched a crude, magical detonator, faint light pulsing at its core. His voice cracked with both fear and bluster. "If you don't accept my terms, I'll blow this place apart. The bomb will kill every prisoner inside." He lifted the device higher for all to see, digging his claws into the girl's shoulders as she whimpered. "You have 10 minutes. Guarantee my safe escape, or they all die." In his mind, Krat still believed he held the advantage. Humans, he thought, were weak. Soft creatures shackled by their attachment to each other. They couldn't bear the thought of sacrificing innocent lives. That sentimentality would be his shield. Roman stepped forward. The crowd parted instinctively as he moved, his steps quiet, unhurried. He stopped a short distance away, eyes cool as they settled on the Orc commander. "So," Roman said, voice devoid of any visible emotion, "you wish to negotiate with me." For a flicker of a moment, Krat felt hope, but then he saw it. The faint curve at the corner of Roman's mouth, not fear, not urgency, curiosity. Roman tilted his head slightly. "Do you know why I didn't kill you earlier?" The question hit Krat like a slap. This wasn't how negotiations were supposed to begin. "What nonsense are you babbling?" he snarled, tightening his grip on the hostage. The glow of the detonator pulsed faster as his thumb hovered over the trigger. "I'll kill them. I swear I will," Roman continued, as if he hadn't heard the threat. His gaze didn't waver. "You abandoned your own warriors and ran. You discarded your men to save yourself. That is the kind of commander you are, without honor, without worth." His voice carried clearly to every ear in the courtyard, soldiers and civilians alike. "You are not feared. You are despised." Rage twisted Krat's features. "You think your foolish words matter. I keep talking and I'll—" His thumb began to press the trigger. In the next instant, the detonator clattered to the ground. Krat blinked, stunned. His hand felt suddenly light. He looked down and saw blood. His wrist ended in a ragged stump. His severed hand, still loosely clutching the detonator, lay on the stone at Roman's feet. Roman stood where he had been, sword drawn, blade wet with fresh blood. "I told you," he said coldly. "You have no value whatsoever." No one had seen him move. Not the prisoners, not the soldiers, not even the orc whose hand had been removed. One moment Krat had leverage, the next he had nothing but pain and terror. Roman's lips curved into a smile colder than the snow around them. "But now, you've gained a little worth." He grabbed what remained of Krat and dragged him across the ground like a discarded sack. The orc's once imposing frame scraped across stone, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. Roman hauled him into the open square where the rescued civilians and exhausted soldiers had gathered. There, he threw Krat down before them. "This," Roman announced, his voice ringing clear, "is the last surviving orc commander. I intend to execute him." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many stepped back instinctively at the sight of the monster who had orchestrated their suffering. But Roman did not raise his sword. Instead, he held the hilt out, not toward the orc, but toward the people. "His life belongs to you," he said. "You, who lived through his cruelty. You, who lost everything under his command. Take this blade. His blood is yours to spill." Fear gripped the civilians. The trauma of captivity still clung to them like chains. Even now, standing in the open, many felt like prisoners. Krat tried to weaponize that fear one last time, cackling through the pain. He whispered threats, promised revenge, tried to turn their memories against them. They flinched. They hesitated. Then a small hand rose. A boy stepped forward from the crowd, thin, clothes torn, eyes sunken from hunger and sleepless nights. He looked barely strong enough to lift a sword, but his voice didn't waver when he spoke. "I'll do it." Roman watched him silently as the boy approached and gripped the offered hilt. The sword rasped out of its scabbard with a lonely, echoing sound. Tears welled up in the boy's eyes, blurring his vision, but he didn't stop walking. He stood over Krat's broken body. "My name is Smith," he said softly, voice shaking. "My friend, he was kind. He couldn't even kill an ant." His fingers tightened around the sword. You skinned him, and you ate him, in front of me." The words tore through the crowd, faces twisted with horror, grief and fury. Smith's shoulders shook as sobs tried to break his voice, but he pushed the blade forward. "Why? Oh," he choked out. "Why did you do that?" He didn't wait for an answer that would never come. Smith's sword plunged into Krat's flesh, once, twice, again and again, each thrust fueled not by skill, but by raw, annihilating grief. He stabbed wildly, screaming, sobbing, demanding answers that the dying orc could no longer provide. Every movement was a desperate attempt to carve his pain out of reality. Watching him, something in the crowd snapped. A mother stepped forward, her eyes hollow, her hands shaking, as she remembered the child she'd never see again. A man whose home had burned to the ground pushed through, expression twisted with rage. A sister who had lost her brother grabbed whatever weapon she could and joined them. They surged as one. What followed was no clean execution. It was a storm of vengeance. Blades, fists, and boots fell upon Krat's body until it ceased to resemble a living creature at all. The people who had been victims became executioners, pouring years of terror and helplessness into every strike. They tore the last orc commander apart until nothing recognizable remained. Caden watched, stomach churning. He'd seen battlefields drenched in blood, had walked among severed limbs and shattered armor. But this was different. This was not soldiers killing enemies. This was a people tearing apart the last piece of their nightmare with their bare hands. He stepped toward Roman, unable to stand still any longer. "Isn't this enough?" So he asked quietly. He's already dead. The crowd continued to strike what was left of Krat, their faces contorted by a mixture of fury and relief. Smith's small body shook as he kept swinging, long after there was nothing left to cut. Caden swallowed hard. "I don't care about the orc," he admitted. "But if this continues, that boy, he'll lose himself. He'll fall too far. How is he supposed to live with this?" Roman turned his gaze on Caden, eyes ancient and unreadable. "Does this sight seem cruel to you?" he asked. Caden hesitated. "It's not cruelty toward the orc I worry about," he said. "It's what this will do to them, to Smith, to their hearts." Roman looked away from the ravaged corpse and out over the ruined fortress, the collapsed walls, the burned buildings, the stained snow. His cloak stirred in the cold wind as he spoke, voice low but absolute. "You're mistaken." He spoke like someone who had seen civilizations rise in splendor and die in fire. "The peaceful Arcadia you remember no longer exists. This world has become one of steel and blood. People are carrying wounds that will never heal. The only way forward is to trample the enemies who gave them those scars." Caden listened, jaw tight. "For Luna to move on," Roman continued, "they cannot simply forget. They must crush what tormented them. Otherwise their fear will rule them for the rest of their lives. This is war, and we are not done." He looked to the horizon beyond the fortress walls, where other battles surely raged unseen. "What happened here is happening elsewhere," Roman said. "In distant lands, the strong are devouring the weak. If you truly want peace, then you cannot show mercy to those who would see you broken. Mercy for monsters is cruelty toward the people you're trying to protect." His words echoed off the battered stone, sinking into every heart that heard them. "That," Roman concluded, "is the path of Dimitri. If you choose to stand with us, it is the path you must walk from now on."
Caden stood in the bitter northern wind, listening to its hollow scream as it rolled over the frozen peaks like a requiem for a world that no longer existed. The cold bit into his skin, but it was nothing compared to the weight pressing on his chest as Roman's words replayed in his mind. He had resisted them at first, clinging to the memory of a gentler Arcadia, a land of laughter, shared warmth, and peace so natural that no one ever questioned it. Now those days felt like a fragile dream crushed beneath the iron-shod boots of invading monsters. To fight the beasts that had shattered their world, they too had to become something inhuman. That was the truth that bruised his soft nature more than any wound. He had always been a man of empathy and calm reason, but the world no longer had space for that kind of softness. Beyond the walls, Arcadia lay under its familiar blanket of snow, a pristine white shroud that covered both old mistakes and fading hopes. It was beautiful, but in a cold, uncaring way. The city gate, once torn apart in battle, now stood rebuilt, fresh timber, cold iron, and raw repairs marking it like a scar that had closed but would never fully heal. The very next day, within those walls, a senior staff meeting was called. The room was thick with the scent of damp clothes, ink, and tension. Caden stood at the head of a battered table, explaining the situation with a calm voice that barely concealed his exhaustion. Pointing to the map spread before them, he laid out the facts. After capturing Luna Fortress, Graxar had marched east toward Elven lands, leaving Krat and 10,000 orcs behind. If the elves fell as well, there would be nothing left to stop the orcish tide. And even if they wanted to counterattack now that Roman had reclaimed Luna, the storm outside was turning the world into a death trap. The blizzard was their greatest enemy. Moving an army through that kind of storm would be nearly impossible. Horses would sink into the drifts, men would freeze before they ever saw the enemy, and the orcs, who thrived in snowfields like predators born of ice, would tear them apart. Caden admitted bluntly that if they fought the orcs in those conditions, they would lose. Across from him, Roman sat with arms folded, as solid and unshakable as the mountains themselves. His eyes didn't show doubt or fear, only calculation. The war, he said, was now a war against time. Every moment they spent hesitating was another moment Graxar used to secure his dominance. Right now, Graxar still believed Luna had fallen. That ignorance was their last advantage, and if they didn't seize it, the chance would be gone forever. Caden argued that there was simply no way to move through that storm, gesturing to the window where whiteout conditions swallowed everything beyond the glass. Roman met his gaze directly and told him to gather every soldier Luna could muster. There was something in his eyes, an authority that didn't ask for agreement, it demanded obedience. He would show them a way to survive, he said, a path Luna had never learned to walk. The scene shifted from the smoky, cramped chamber to the open training grounds inside the fortress. The wind whipped cloaks and banners as Luna's warriors stood in formation, faces tired and hardened by loss. Roman stood before them, his silhouette stark against the grey sky. He began by telling them something they did not want to hear. He acknowledged their efforts to adapt to Arcadia's brutal environment, but said that they lacked desperation. Silence fell, heavy and sharp. The words cut deep. These men had bled in the snow, watched their homes burn, and buried their dead. To hear that it still wasn't enough felt like an insult. Caden couldn't hold back and asked if Roman was claiming they hadn't truly tried. It was anger born of wounded pride and exhausted hearts. But Roman's face remained completely unreadable as he answered yes. Inwardly, Roman compared Luna to another place he knew, the North Sea Ice Palace from his past life. He thought of what separated the two. The answer to him was simple. In Luna, safety had been guaranteed by the power of the World Tree and Queen Isabella. Beneath that divine shelter, the people had forgotten how to stand on their own. Perhaps in the beginning, Luna had fought hard to survive the cold. But once Isabella was born and her blessings spread warmth and protection, they had grown complacent. They traded vigilance for comfort, discipline for dependence. When she disappeared, the entire kingdom crumbled almost overnight. He told them that plainly. Luna, he said, had placed its entire weight on a single pillar. When that pillar vanished, the structure collapsed. A country that lost its ability to defend itself the moment one person went missing could not be called normal. The soldiers shifted uneasily because beneath the sting of his criticism there was truth they couldn't deny. Then Roman made a declaration. Now that Luna had been placed under Dimitri's command, he would make them self-reliant. He would not simply protect them, he would break and rebuild them. He introduced a new name to them, Seelin's martial arts. It was more than a fighting technique, it was a way of existing in the snow. He explained that it wasn't just about moving across the frozen land. It was about erasing one's presence entirely, leaving no footprints, no breath, no sound. With it, they could become part of the winter itself, unseen, unfelt, yet deadly. More than that, he would teach them how to track enemies even in the heart of a blizzard, where eyes were useless and sight vanished into white. It was a discipline that surpassed Luna's old ways in every respect. The training that followed was merciless. Days blurred into one another, filled with harsh drills and relentless conditioning. Soldiers who had once been stiff and clumsy in deep snow learned to glide over it. They learned to steady their breathing, to quiet their hearts, to feel the slightest tremor beneath their boots and the faintest shift in the wind. One day, as they watched Roman move through waist-deep snow as easily as if he walked on stone, one of the lunar warriors whispered to Caden, asking if Roman was some kind of angel sent by the gods. Others murmured in agreement. To them, there was no other explanation for what they were seeing. Caden looked at Roman and shook his head. No, he answered. Roman was not an angel. He remembered their first meeting. The overwhelming presence, the calm savagery in combat, the unbreakable will. For a brief moment in the past, even Caden had wanted to believe Roman was a divine savior. But the longer he followed him, the clearer it became. Angels brought mercy and comfort. Roman Dimitri brought something else entirely. He was the very embodiment of a warrior's spirit, the will to endure, to dominate, to bend the world through sheer strength of resolve. In Caden's eyes, Roman had already stepped into the realm of transcendence, beyond normal human limits. He told the others that if they followed this man, they might one day reach toward that same distant height. Preparations finished quickly. There was no room left for doubt or delay. 2 days later, under a bruised purple sky, the heavy gates of Lunar Fortress opened once more. Roman and the newly trained lunar warriors stepped out into the blizzard. This time, they did not stumble or huddle against the cold. They moved as shadows sliding over a white canvas, silent, coordinated, and deadly. In just a handful of days, they had become something fundamentally different from what they were before. Far from the fortress, deep in the jagged mountains, another story unfolded in darkness. A cave mouth guarded by 2 hulking orcs gaped in the cliffside. Their breath steamed in foul clouds, tusks yellow and cracked, bodies looming like grotesque statues carved from flesh. Inside, prisoners from Luna huddled together in the freezing gloom. The air was suffocating, a mix of damp stone, unwashed bodies, and the sour stench of fear. An orc stomped into the chamber and announced, with cruel satisfaction, that Graxar had captured Lunar Fortress and Arcadia now lay practically in orc hands. His harsh laughter echoed along the walls, grinding what remained of the prisoners' hope into dust. Among them sat Gyro, a guardian knight of Luna, who had once rushed ahead against orders to attack the orcs on his own. His armor was gone, his status stripped away, replaced with rags and bruises. He felt as though the world had collapsed around him. Every breath hurt. He blamed himself for everything. The loss of his men, the fall of his homeland. In his mind, he had pushed Luna off a cliff with his own hands. That self-hatred was a weight heavier than chains. Without warning, the orc tossed something into the cell. A human hand landed on the floor with a sickening sound. Pale fingers stiff and curled. The orc called them slaves and told them to eat if they wanted to live. Then he left, closing the door with a dull final thud, sealing them once more in the dark. Quiet curses and choked whispers spread among the prisoners. Their anger had no teeth. Hunger and cold had dulled even their defiance. Then Gyro stood. He walked toward the severed hand, not with hesitation but with a strange, deliberate calm. The others watched, expecting him to give in, to accept the orc's humiliating terms, just to stay alive. Instead, he picked up the hand, sat facing the door, and began pulling away the flesh. His eyes held a cold, frightening clarity. When his comrades asked what he was doing, he answered simply, even if he died here, he would take some of the enemy with him. There was no madness in his tone, only resolve. He stripped the flesh and began grinding the exposed bone against the floor, shaping it into a jagged point. The scraping sound echoed like a grim rhythm in the cave, morbid and steady. The others stared, caught between horror and awe, as their fallen knight reshaped his despair into a weapon. As he worked, Gyro's thoughts spiraled through every choice he had made. He wondered if, had he waited for the 30 reinforcements from Dmitri instead of charging ahead, things might have turned out differently. Could those unknown warriors have saved Luna before everything collapsed? He answered himself with bitter logic. Dmitri owed them nothing. They had no deep alliance, no shared history. Why would a distant lord sacrifice his own limited forces for a kingdom that had already been consumed by war? From the start, he concluded, there had never been any real hope. He felt abandoned not just by other nations, but by the heavens themselves. They had once fought to protect their continent, and now they were being thrown away like scraps. He remembered in some quiet internal space the question he had once asked the gods. What did they want from Luna? Why did those who had sacrificed everything end up suffering the most? No answer came, only cold and silence. He exhaled, a soft, resigned sigh that hung briefly in the frigid air. His fingers tightened around the sharpened bone. He accepted one final truth. His life as a snowfield swordsman was over. He would never again wield the polished steel that had once defined him. Now there was only this crude shard and the last flicker of his will. Gyro moved to the side of the doorway, pressing himself into the shadows. If this was to be his end, he decided it would not be as a helpless victim. He would die facing the enemy as a human, not as an animal waiting for slaughter. Heavy footsteps approached from outside, vibrating through the stone. The latch lifted. The door began to swing inward. Gyro sprang forward with everything he had left. Bone shard aimed for the throat of the first silhouette that appeared. The tip stopped a breath away from Caden's neck. Both men froze, eyes wide with shock. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between that sharpened bone and Caden's skin. Gyro's chest heaved, his heart pounding like it was trying to escape his ribs. Caden stared back, just as stunned, because both of them had believed the other to be dead. Words stumbled at the threshold of their lips and then fell away, leaving only stunned silence. Then motion returned to the world. Caden's rescue squad flooded the chamber with purposeful speed, unshackling prisoners and helping them to their feet. Orders were given in quick, sharp whispers. Bodies moved, chains clattered, and the long-dead hope in the prisoners' eyes flickered back to life. Caden, guiding them out through the snow and stone, moved with a grace and certainty he hadn't possessed before Luna's fall. His steps scarcely disturbed the ice. He had learned, in his own way, to walk the same path Roman was carving. Gyro stumbled along, still struggling to believe what was happening. In his mind, Luna should already have been wiped from the map. Everything he knew about how the world worked told him this moment was impossible. Yet here he was, alive, walking out of a prison he had accepted as his tomb. Caden turned to him with an energy that warmed even the frozen air. He told Gyro to pull himself together. The war, he said, was not over yet. There was a spark in his gaze that hadn't existed before meeting Roman, a flame borrowed from a greater fire. Gyro managed to ask what Caden meant, his voice raw. Caden answered with a faint, almost boyish smile. Dimitri's forces had crushed the Orcs, and Luna Fortress had been reclaimed. Gyro's world tilted. The idea that 30 foreign warriors had accomplished what he believed impossible felt like a miracle. His eyes filled and overflowed, hot tears carving clean lines through the dirt on his face before freezing in the cold. The crushing guilt that had been suffocating him loosened its grip. Luna hadn't died because of him. The homeland he loved had survived. He looked around, searching for the man whose name now carried that miracle, Roman Dimitri. He wanted to thank him, to bow, to apologize for ever doubting that salvation could come. He wanted to see the face of the commander who had turned the tide with so little and changed the fate of his kingdom. Far above, on a small cliff overlooking the valley and the freed prisoners, stood a solitary figure. Roman watched everything silently, sword at his side, cloak fluttering in the cruel wind. Snow swirled around him, but he remained mute and still, eyes scanning the distance for threats that might yet appear. He did not descend to stand among the cheering captives. He did not wait to receive their gratitude or bask in their praise. This, to him, was not the end. Only one step on a path soaked in snow and blood. From his vantage point, Roman observed the kingdom he had claimed and the people he had begun to reshape, a lone sentinel facing whatever storm would come next. Snow fell without mercy across the frozen expanse of Arcadia, each flake another layer in an endless burial shroud that seemed determined to swallow the world whole. The continent had become a realm of eternal winter, where survival itself was an act of defiance. Somewhere deep within that white wasteland, near the borders of elven territory, the silence of the snow was shattered by the roar of war. What had once been pristine, untouched landscape was now stained with the chaotic colors of battle, dark crimson spreading across the white canvas like ink spilled on paper. The Orcs had come in numbers that seemed endless, a tide of green muscle and iron crashing against the walls of the elven fortress. High above on the stone ramparts, elven archers stood with pale faces, their expressions carved from desperation and exhaustion. Their fingers bled from pulling bowstrings, loosing arrow after arrow into the horde below. Each shaft found its mark, but still the enemy surged forward. The elves knew with terrible clarity that if those gates fell, everything they loved would be consumed. So they held their ground, breath hitching in frozen lungs, watching the massacre unfold beneath them with hearts heavy as stone. Below the towering fortress walls, the battlefield had descended into something worse than chaos. It had become a slaughterhouse. At the center of that carnage stood Graxar, the orc lord of the Grey Wasteland tribe, moving through elven soldiers with terrifying efficiency. His massive blade rose and fell in brutal rhythm, cleaving through armor and bone as easily as a farmer's scythe through grain. Each swing left another body crumpled in the blood-stained snow. Around him flickered a faint crimson aura, pulsing with malice and hunger, a visual promise of the devastation he carried in every strike. His presence alone was enough to drain the courage from those who faced him. He stood over the corpse of a freshly killed soldier and laughed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed off the stone walls. He mocked the elves, calling them pathetic, asking if they truly thought their frail bodies could stop him. The remaining foot soldiers trembled where they stood, legs shaking, hands white-knuckled around their spears. They were trapped between duty to their homeland and the primal terror radiating from the orc lord. An elf archer on the wall gritted his teeth, eyes stinging from wind and the sight of slaughter below. Watching the red aura twist around Graxar's form, he realized with sinking dread that this was the legendary warlord himself, Graxar of the Grey Wasteland. Then, cutting through the rhythm of Graxar's dominance, an orc soldier came sprinting toward him, face twisted in panic. He shouted that there was a surprise attack. Humans were striking from the rear. Graxar's mind raced. The only human stronghold in the region, Luna Fortress, had already been captured. He had crushed them himself. The humans were supposed to be broken, scattered, leaderless, so who could possibly be launching a counterattack now? The information didn't make sense, and that uncertainty clawed at the edges of his confidence. Far behind the orcish lines, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Kevin moved through the deep snow with unnatural grace, his eyes sharp and focused, scanning the battlefield like a hawk searching for prey. He wasn't trudging or struggling, he was gliding, his movements so fluid it seemed as though the snow itself was bending to his will. He was using Seelin's martial arts, the technique Roman Dmitri had taught them before their march. It was a discipline that allowed warriors to harmonize with the frozen environment, to become one with the blizzard rather than fight against it. Kevin and the other Dmitri soldiers appeared seemingly from nowhere, their silhouettes materializing out of the white storm like vengeful spirits. They struck without warning, blades flashing in the pale light, cutting down orcs with surgical precision before vanishing back into the swirling snow. The orcs at the rear turned at the sound of screams, just in time to see their comrades fall and the attackers disappear as if they had never existed. There were no footprints, no trails. The snow remained smooth and untouched where the humans had stood moments before. The surviving orcs stared in disbelief, a creeping dread settling over them. These weren't the weak, desperate humans they had expected. These were something else entirely. Warriors from beyond the endless mountain range, perhaps, or spirits given flesh. A sense of unease spread through the orcish ranks like poison in water. Moments later, the Dmitri soldiers struck again, emerging from the blizzard to kill several more orcs before vanishing once more. Watching from a distance, the Lunar warriors, men who had struggled just to survive the snow, looked on in stunned amazement. They had never seen humans fight like this. It was as if the storm itself had taken their side. From a cliff overlooking the valley, Roman Dmitri watched the battle with cold, calculating eyes. Every movement below was a piece on a board he had already studied. He could see the flaw in Graxar's formation clearly. Because the fortress had fallen and the orcs believed Luna was defeated, they had placed all their elite troops at the front. Their rear was exposed, vulnerable, manned by weaker forces who never expected an attack. That arrogance was their greatest weakness. Roman stood with his cloak billowing in the wind and issued his orders. The Dmitri forces would continue their hit-and-run tactics, and the Lunar soldiers would join them to execute every orc they could reach. By striking the rear, where power wasn't concentrated, they could reverse the numerical disadvantage and throw the enemy into chaos. The plan was simple, brutal, and effective. Below, Graxar roared in fury when news of the falling rear guard reached him. His rage was a physical force, boiling over as he realized his momentum was being disrupted. He screamed orders for the orcs to turn around and crush the pests at their back. Seeing the orcs react exactly as predicted, Roman allowed himself a faint, cold smile. He raised his hand with deliberate calm and gave the signal for the second phase of his plan. Desperate to regain control, the orcs mounted their snarling wolves and charged toward the rear, claws digging into ice as the beasts lunged forward. They funneled into a narrow mountain pass, the terrain forcing their formation to tighten and compress. As they entered the narrowest section of the pass, Roman's second operation began. Luna and Dimitri's soldiers ambushed them from both sides, emerging from the shadows of the cliffs in a perfectly timed pincer movement. Rocks tumbled, blades swung, and the orcs, trapped in the cramped space, were helpless. Many were cut down in moments. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the human forces vanished again, using the North Sea Ice Palace's stealth techniques to melt back into the blizzard. The orcs cursed and bellowed, their wolves snapping at empty air. They tried to chase, tried to find tracks, but the wind had already erased every sign. The snow swirled and covered all evidence instantly. The remaining orcs moved forward again, but this time with caution. Eyes darting toward every shadow and snowbank, the confidence they had carried now replaced by wariness. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the lunar soldiers watching from their positions felt relief bloom in their chests. Hope, fragile but real, flickered to life. They praised Seelan's martial arts openly, marveling at the technique Roman Dimitri had shared with them. That a human could possess such knowledge and that he would teach it freely to foreigners seemed almost miraculous. They whispered among themselves, wondering if Roman was something more than mortal. Behind the front lines, Graxar heard the commotion and turned, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. His instincts told him the enemy commander was no ordinary warrior. He could feel a strong aura somewhere in the distance, something vast and ominous, like a mountain hidden in mist. Were these strangers truly from beyond the endless range? Whoever they were dismantling his army piece by piece. Graxar knew he had to act personally if he wanted to turn the tide. The red aura around his body flared with renewed intensity, violent and oppressive. He appeared at the rear of his own forces with heavy footsteps that shook the ground. He ordered his troops to step back and not be drawn into the enemy's traps. He saw clearly now what was happening. A series of calculated provocations designed to pull his men into disadvantageous terrain. The orcs, despite their bloodlust, obeyed and cleared a path for their lord. Graxar charged forward, blade raised high, steel reflecting the dull grey sky. His movements seemed reckless, but his intent was focused entirely on drawing out the hidden leader. Then, without warning, a Dimitri soldier burst from the snow and struck at him. It was a bold, desperate move, a blur of motion against the white backdrop. Graxar blocked the swing, and the collision sent a visible shockwave rippling through the mountain, spraying snow in every direction. Graxar's arms trembled from the impact. He was shocked. This was no ordinary foot soldier. The attack had been amplified through perfect timing and use of terrain. The soldier knew he was dancing on the edge of a blade. One mistake, and he would be dead. Their swords clashed again, steel ringing sharp and discordant in the frozen air. Graxar studied the man and assumed he was the human leader. He challenged him to a duel, saying that if the human could defeat him, the Grey Wasteland tribe would admit defeat and withdraw. But then, from somewhere in the distance, a calm voice answered. It was steady, measured, and carried an edge that made the air feel heavier. The voice alone sent a chill down Graxar's spine, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. He tightened his grip on his blade and demanded to know who spoke. A question flickered through his mind. Was the warrior before him not the human leader after all? Hearing the voice, the Dimitri soldiers smiled with quiet confidence. A figure emerged slowly from the thick snow, the wind dying just long enough for his silhouette to become clear. It was Roman Dimitri. He walked with a relaxed but predatory gait, eyes locked on the orc lord. As he stepped forward, the soldier who had been fighting Graxar quickly moved aside. Roman came to a stop and asked a simple question. If Graxar wins, What does he think will happen to those who followed Roman? Graxar answered that it would be up to the victor, a low, arrogant snarl. Roman nodded slowly and accepted the proposal, but added a warning. He wanted no misunderstanding about the consequences. If Roman won, he said, he would exterminate every orc who had used humans as food. His expression hardened into something terrifyingly absolute. He wasn't talking about winning a battle. He was talking about erasing orcs from the continent of Arcadia entirely. Graxar flared in rage, his pride wounded by the human's arrogance. He clutched his blade until his knuckles turned white and swore that if he won, he would trample Roman's homeland into dust. Without another word, both warriors swung their swords with full force. The collision was cataclysmic. A ripple of energy tore through the mountain range, sparks exploding from the clash of steel, bright enough to momentarily blind those watching. The sound was like thunder trapped in a canyon. Roman deflected Graxar's attack with fluid precision, guiding the orc's momentum away until the massive blade buried itself deep in the frozen ground. Graxar pushed himself to the limit, muscles bulging as he wrenched his weapon free. Their blades met again and again, sparking and ringing across the entire mountain range. They moved at terrifying speed, a dance of death almost too fast for the eye to follow. With every exchange, Roman's attacks grew harder for Graxar to handle. Each strike felt like being hit by a falling star. Graxar's mind reeled. He couldn't believe he was being pushed back by a human. He had spent his life crushing men beneath his heel, yet this man was different, stronger, faster, and utterly relentless. As their swords ground together once more, Roman asked mockingly if that was the best Graxar could do. His voice was steady, as if he weren't in the middle of a life-or-death struggle. Graxar roared and charged his aura even further, drawing upon every last drop of his strength. His body and blade glowed with crimson light so intense it turned the surrounding snow into a bloody mist. He questioned inwardly how such a monster could exist among humans. He had always seen humans as prey, weak and fragile, but Roman Dimitri was a predator of a much higher order, something beyond mortal limits. Roman decided to end it. He shifted his stance, and the pressure around him changed, becoming something ancient and overwhelming. He channeled the heavenly demon sword art, a technique that transcended the boundaries of mortal swordsmanship. With a single devastating stroke, he cut down the Orc Lord who had terrorized the entire continent of Arcadia. As Graxar fell, the crimson aura around him vanished like smoke. The only sounds left were the whistling of the wind and the soft, final thud of his body hitting the snow. Graxar, the nightmare that had haunted Arcadia's frozen north, lay motionless in the snow. His reign of terror had ended not with a prolonged struggle, but with a single, perfect strike. Roman stood over the corpse, sword still in hand, his expression as cold and unreadable as the mountains around him. The soldiers, both Dimitri and Luna, stared in stunned silence, witnessing the fall of a legend and the rise of something even greater.
The Orc Lord Graxar kneels in the snow, defeated and bleeding, with Roman's blade at his throat. But just as death seems certain, Graxar calls out to a distant presence, and something unnatural answers. What happens when a dying warlord accepts power from a devil? Roman is about to find out. Roman's final strike had been devastating. Graxar collapsed to his knees, sending up a spray of white powder as his body hit the frozen ground. Blood streamed from his wounds, steaming in the bitter cold. His severed hand lay a few feet away in the snow, fingers still locked around the hilt of his sword, as if refusing to surrender even in death. The once feared warlord now looked small and broken, Roman's blade resting against his throat. Graxar knelt there in silence, breath ragged, staring at the crimson stain spreading beneath him. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. Instead, he muttered something strange. In the end, that man was right. His voice was barely audible over the wind. He spoke of a monster beyond the endless mountains, a prophecy he had tried to ignore. Roman watched him carefully, wondering who Graxar was speaking to. Graxar's thoughts drifted to a memory from years ago. A stranger had come to him in the frozen wastes, offering a deal, surrender everything, and receive power in return. Graxar had refused. He knew instinctively that the man was a devil, something dark and unnatural. He was a lord of his people, and he would not become anyone's puppet. But as he lay dying, Graxar's mind stumbled over something disturbing. How had he known the stranger was a devil? The memory felt incomplete, as if someone had reached into his mind and removed key details. He couldn't remember the stranger's face clearly, couldn't recall why he'd felt such certainty. Had he truly met that figure? Or was his mind being tampered with from the shadows? Orcs were different from humans, stronger, more resilient, built to survive in harsh environments. Their greatest blessing had always been their fertility. Orc mothers gave birth to large litters, ensuring the survival of their race. But when Arcadia froze over and food became scarce, that blessing turned into a curse. Every new birth meant another mouth to feed, another soul destined to starve. One day, Graxar returned home to find his mother being devoured by their own kin. Starvation had driven the orcs to cannibalism. As she died in his arms, she told him not to be angry. This was their destiny. Graxar sat in the blood-soaked den, holding her head in his lap, and felt the world crack beneath him. He questioned why any god would create a race, only to watch them tear each other apart. As Graxar sat trembling with rage and grief, a hooded figure appeared behind him. The stranger's voice was smooth and cold as he called the orcs a cursed race, suggesting they devour other species instead of themselves. Graxar spun around in fury, but saw only empty snow. Then the voice coiled around his ear again, closer this time. From the mist emerged a blond man, his face hidden beneath a deep hood. Before Graxar could respond, the stranger extended his hand, and a dark aura rolled out like fog. The temperature dropped even further. The man said he would bestow a true blessing, a connection through consciousness. It wasn't a gift, it was a leash. He promised that one day he would come calling, then he vanished, dissolving into the snow as if he'd never existed. Graxar sat in silence, still cradling his mother's body. The black aura the stranger had left behind lingered in the air like smoke. Suddenly, the dark mist surged into Graxar's chest. A new thought planted itself in his mind. Instead of eating their own kind, the orcs could conquer other races and make them their food. The logic felt perfect, inevitable. Graxar's body began to radiate a faint crimson aura. His grief twisted into purpose. His path as a conqueror had begun, not through his own will, but through the invisible strings of a devil pulling from the shadows. The memory snapped back into focus, and Graxar realized the truth. He had met that devil. His entire rise to power, his wars, his conquests, his transformation into a warlord had been orchestrated. The fog in his mind cleared, and he saw the blond man's face with terrifying clarity. Rage flooded through him. Because they were connected through consciousness, Graxar screamed into the void, knowing the devil could hear him. He demanded power, not for himself, but to protect his race. He was willing to discard his soul, to become a tool, if it meant his people would survive. His desperate plea echoed across the frozen battlefield and travelled far beyond. In a distant throne room, Emperor Alexander of the Alexander Kingdom sat in silence, waiting. The plea reached him clearly. He had been expecting this moment, the moment his long investment finally paid off. A twisted smile spread across his face. "I will grant it," he whispered. Back on the battlefield, Graxar was consumed by a thick black aura. The daylight seemed to be swallowed by the darkness pouring from his body. His aura erupted violently, and he rose to his feet. The pressure was immense, cracking the ice beneath him. Roman was forced back by the sudden surge of energy, his eyes narrowing as he adjusted his stance. Roman recognized the aura immediately. It was the same unnatural power he had encountered in the Alexander Kingdom's labyrinth, a borrowed strength that violated the natural order. While the world believed Emperor Alexander was resting peacefully after the war with Dmitri, Roman knew better. The emperor was weaving schemes across the continent. Roman decided to observe. He wanted to see how strong Graxar would become after accepting the devil's power. He stood motionless, hand on his sword, watching with the calm patience of someone who had already decided the outcome. Meanwhile, Graxar's body began to change. His green skin darkened to a bruised purple. His muscles swelled, tearing through what remained of his armor. Golden light blazed from his eyes. 2 black horns erupted from his skull, jagged and menacing. Most horrifying of all, his severed hand regenerated from the dark mist, bone and flesh knitting together in seconds. Graxar looked at Roman and smiled, a terrifying expression filled with unnatural confidence. He lunged forward, grabbing his massive blade from the ground, and charged. The earth exploded behind him from the force of his movement. He swung his sword with everything he had, the air screaming as the blade cut through it. Roman blocked the attack without expression. The impact would have shattered the arms of any ordinary warrior, but Roman didn't even flinch. Graxar grinned and said if he could just kill Roman, his people could finally live. He believed it completely. This stolen power was their salvation. He attacked again and again, faster than before, his blade coming from every direction. But Roman blocked every single strike with effortless precision. Soldiers from both sides stopped fighting, transfixed by the battle unfolding before them. They could hardly believe what they were witnessing. This didn't feel like a fight between mortals. It felt like a collision of fundamental forces. Graxar pushed harder, pouring everything into each swing. He had given up his soul for this power. He had to win. If he lost now, his sacrifice meant nothing. He swung his blade with all his might, aiming to cleave Roman in half. Roman blocked it again. The collision sent a shockwave across the battlefield, stripping snow from trees and nearly knocking soldiers off their feet. Yet none of Graxar's attacks reached Roman. Every strike was met by that unbreakable wall of steel. It was as if Roman could see the future. Roman spoke for the first time since the transformation. His voice was calm, almost bored. "I took the trouble to meet all your attacks head-on," he said. "Just to obtain that pitiful power, you abandoned yourself." His eyes weren't looking at a monster, they were looking at a man who had betrayed everything he once was. Roman deflected Graxar's next attack with a flick of his wrist, sending the Orc Lord stumbling backward. Then Roman asked a question. "Do you know what I hate the most?" He stepped forward slowly, each footfall deliberate and heavy. Graxar didn't answer. Instead, he swung his sword again in desperation. This time, Roman didn't block. He simply stepped aside, letting the massive blade crash into the frozen ground. Before Graxar could recover, Roman launched his counterattack. It was a single perfect strike, a flash of silver light moving faster than the eye could follow. The sound was sharp, like a whip cracking. Roman answered his own question as his blade cut through the air. "What I hate most," he said coldly, "is when my opponent is no longer truly there." To Roman, Graxar had ceased to exist the moment he accepted the devil's power. He was no longer a warrior. He was a shadow, a puppet, a hollow shell filled with borrowed strength, and Roman had no respect for shadows. The air on the battlefield thickened with tension as Roman and Graxar crossed blades. The collision sent a visible shockwave rippling outward, distorting the frozen atmosphere around them. Graxar couldn't match Roman's power. He was hurled backward, his massive body skidding across the ground, carving deep trenches in the ice and dirt. Roman remained unmoved, his stance solid amid the chaos. He told Graxar he needed to bring more to the fight if he wanted to see Roman's true strength unleashed. His words carried no anger, only the expectation of a warrior who demanded a worthy opponent. Graxar stared back, his face showing raw fear for the first time. A warlord who now realized he faced something beyond human. Roman pressed the attack without pause. Using heavenly demon steps, he closed the distance in a blur too fast for the eye to follow. The ground cracked beneath his feet from the sheer force. His sword swung with glowing intensity, surrounded by thick purple mana that enveloped Graxar completely, sealing off any escape. A massive explosion followed. When the dust settled, a deep crater marked the battlefield where Graxar had stood. Nothing remained of the Orc Lord. His body had been completely erased by the overwhelming power. The Orc warriors watched in stunned silence, the reality of their leader's annihilation sinking in. They knew surrender was their only option. The Orcs dropped their weapons, falling to their knees in waves. Hundreds of blades clattered against the frozen ground as they begged for mercy, swearing eternal loyalty to Dimitri if only their race could survive. They saw Roman as the one who had single-handedly turned the tide of war. Roman acknowledged they might have had their reasons for starting the conflict. The orcs felt a brief glimmer of hope, thanking him profusely. But his expression hardened. He turned and stated clearly that from the moment they had made humans their food, orcs and humans could never coexist. He had no personal grudge, but he would not leave behind a potential future threat. The orcs' hope vanished as they understood their fate. Roman gave the order without hesitation: eliminate them all. His soldiers carried out the command efficiently. The battlefield filled with the sounds of execution rather than combat. Every orc was systematically wiped out, fulfilling Roman's promise from the duel. With the orcs annihilated, Roman entered the elven fortress. The structure blended living wood with elegant architecture, its arches rising like natural spires. Teresa, an elf with snow-white skin and pointed ears, greeted him with her delegation. She expressed deep gratitude, stating that without Roman's intervention, the elves would have been destroyed. Roman replied that their goals had simply aligned. He mentioned arranging a meeting after stabilizing Luna to address Arcadia's chaos. Teresa smiled and agreed, then asked if he would accompany them briefly into their territory. Her tone suggested important matters ahead. Roman consented without hesitation. Deep in the elven forest, they reached a massive tree, its trunk wider than a castle tower, leaves shimmering faintly. Teresa explained that when the orcs first attacked, they consulted the world tree's wisdom and glimpsed fragments of the future. This was why they defended it so fiercely. It served as both home and oracle. The prophecy foretold a human would aid them in their darkest hour. Then Graxar appeared with unnatural power, a dangerous force that shook reality itself. Teresa requested Roman meet the Mother Elf to discuss this corruption further. Roman agreed, intrigued by the source of Graxar's strength. Inside elven territory, Roman noted how elves typically retained youthful appearances until death. He expected the Mother Elf to match this, but she appeared elderly, wrinkled face, frost-white hair. She greeted him warmly, her frail voice carrying deep authority. She asked if he knew of the demon realm. Roman confirmed the world's structure: heavenly realm, demon realm, and mortal realm, separated by supreme laws to prevent interference. The Mother Elf explained a rift had formed when a foreign being entered the Salamander continent, causing chill to leak through and freeze Arcadia. Roman wondered if she meant Alexander, or even himself. She continued that weakening dimensional walls allowed Graxar to accept demon realm power, turning him into a demon. She warned this was just the beginning. The being who shattered the balance must be eliminated to prevent total collapse. The Mother Elf described the Demon King, a godlike entity currently bound by laws. Once fully descended, nothing could stop it. Roman realized why Kronos had abandoned pride for a truce with Dimitri. They anticipated the dimensional chaos. If Graxar was merely a subordinate, human forces alone couldn't prevail. Roman reflected that his own existence might serve as a counterbalance. In his previous world, he had been too powerful, unable to fully manifest heavenly realm arts. Demon realm foes could finally push him to his limits. When asked his stance, Roman said he made no promises, but would remove any obstacles in his path. The Mother Elf offered a gift: communion with the world tree for glimpses of past, present, and future. Though typically reserved for her alone, they made an exception for Arcadia's savior. Roman accepted, approaching the frozen, withered giant. Its skeletal branches loomed like a tombstone for the continent. Touching the bark triggered a golden aura, enveloping both him and the tree. Ice melted from its surface, steam rising as life returned, green buds emerging, bark smoothing. Teresa watched in awe. Roman's consciousness detached, becoming a weightless spirit of light. Roman found himself in Kronos' founding emperor's hidden chamber. Hooded figures knelt before Alexander, reporting unrest. Duke Vito and others, resentful of Valhalla's corruption, were rallying nobles. Civil war loomed if suppressed by force. Alexander smiled darkly, dismissing Roman Dimitri as insignificant. He ordered preparations. The moment Valhalla fell into chaos, their opportunity would arrive. Roman understood Alexander's silence. They waited like scavengers for the perfect strike. The scene shifted to Queen Isabel, severely wounded, slumped against a tree. A soldier urged her to flee to Luna, as Kronos had discovered their plans. She refused, citing her prophesied destiny. Having sent her followers to death, she couldn't abandon them. Rising despite her injuries, she ordered Knight Commander Leo to return to Luna. It was a queen's command. As she vanished into the darkness, Roman's consciousness returned. He connected the visions. Valhalla, demons, Alexander, Isabel, all pieces of encroaching darkness. Following Isabel would reveal the full truth. Elves knelt before Roman, pledging their race's loyalty. Flashback to the golden resonance. The mother elf recognized his power as flames of the fire demon, now bringing life. The world tree regenerated before their eyes, their centuries-old wish fulfilled. Tears flowed as Teresa declared Roman the prophesied saviour, ordering all to follow him. Jero and Caden arrived from the forest edge. Jero bowed deeply, grateful for Luna's salvation, offering his service. Roman asked Caden about their contract terms. Caden confirmed Luna's loyalty to Dimitri in exchange for aid. Roman noted Dimitri had fulfilled its end by eliminating the orcs. Turning to the elves, he rejected uncompensated loyalty. The mother elf replied that the world tree's revival through his power was reward enough. Arcadia now had hope. Roman accepted. In return for their service, Dimitri would protect both elves and Luna. He stood as undisputed guardian of the continent, having seen its threats and secured its key allies. As Roman Dimitri navigates alliances and hidden agendas, visitors from Valhalla arrive with divided loyalties. What game is the Emperor playing? Arcadia's top priority became self-sufficiency through collective strength. Elves would focus on farming and cultivation across the region. Humans and other races divided remaining labor among themselves. Using the World Tree's power, they established a war gate linking Dimitri to the Salamander continent, creating a secure trade route. Without developing independent survival capabilities, Arcadia's downfall was inevitable. The meeting concluded, and elders from various races returned to Dimitri Castle in Goddess Mountains. Someone presented a report. Odelia's condition worsened daily. With the royal family vanished, conflicts erupted everywhere. Southern Kronos states, Umberto, Redford and Fronter, insisted on direct talks regarding the crisis. Roman Dimitri asked about the investigation he had ordered. Results showed Queen Isabel's last trace in the Kingdom of Winter. She reorganized her forces there before disappearing again, destination unknown. Roman inquired about Conuel and Commander Jonathan next. 2 guests from Valhalla had arrived, Sanchez and Count Bragan. Sanchez, disciple of Sanchez Morales, led key rebel forces. Count Bragan appeared loyal to Valhalla's emperor. Amid these complications, the meeting ended for now. Count Bragan contemplated his mission. Pressure Roman Dimitri to prevent him from joining Duke Victor, no matter the method. This task proved difficult, as Roman operated in a world of power where persuasion rarely worked easily. A servant informed Bragan that Lord Roman was occupied and unavailable. Bragan wondered if Roman had met Sanchez first, given rumours of Valhalla's 3 visitor factions as dangerous rebel influences. Later, Sanchez met Roman. He sought aid against Valhalla's emperor. Roman explained the empire's split. The emperor's faction versus rebels aiming to restore Valhalla's foundational principles of nature. The emperor's strongest warriors and army remained blindly loyal. Sanchez pressed for direct support to advance Valhalla. Roman refused outright involvement, as it would undermine the rebels' legitimacy. He questioned why rebels needed him if they truly had popular backing. True removal of the emperor required Valhalla's own strength. Roman offered indirect aid under conditions, a temporary alliance until Kronos fell, ensuring Valhalla stayed out of his path. That evening, Count Bragan requested another meeting, but Dimitri Castle replied that the young lord remained busy with private matters. Wait in the guest room. Days passed. Bragan's patience wore thin by the 3rd morning. He summoned Billy, ordering a meeting date by any means, even involving the Empire directly. Billy arrived at Dmitri Castle, meeting Hans, Roman's trusted aide. He demanded Count Bragan couldn't wait longer. A date would let them leave immediately. Hans calmly stated the young lord allowed no visitors until his private work finished. Billy lost his temper, insisting the request be forwarded. Hans refused, deeming forced meetings inappropriate. Billy moved to grab him, but a cold voice stopped him. "Lower your hand." Billy turned to see Kevin, Dmitri's most fearsome warrior and team member. Kevin approached slowly, voice icy. "What do you think you are?" threatening Hans on Dmitri soil. This moment revealed to Valhalla's envoys the depth of Roman Dmitri's power. Not just his army, but his people. Loyalty ran through every layer, making intrusion impossible. Kevin confronts a Valhalla knight who crossed a line in Dmitri territory, unleashing a lesson in loyalty that echoes Roman's past ruthlessness. Count Bragan's patience frays as delays mount, leading to a tense meeting where power dynamics shift irreversibly. One man's insult becomes an empire's warning. Kevin positioned himself firmly in the room, his gaze locked on Billy with unyielding focus. He questioned Billy's audacity in threatening Hans within Dmitri walls. Billy shifted uncomfortably, dismissing the reaction as overblown and attempting to deflect. Kevin held his ground, his voice steady as a thickening red aura pulsed around him. Billy snapped back, declaring himself a Valhalla knight unbound by local rules, viewing Hans as insignificant. The room went silent. Kevin struck, a sharp slap that snapped Billy's head aside. Billy froze in shock, hand rising to his cheek. Kevin followed with more blows, each precise and unrelenting. To Kevin, Hans wasn't a servant. He was family who had supported Kevin's kin in their darkest times. Insulting him crossed an unforgivable boundary. Billy collapsed to his knees, bloodied and dazed, muttering his Valhalla status in disbelief. A private soldier from a duchy had overpowered him effortlessly. Kevin loomed above, red aura flickering like restrained flame, offering a story rooted in Roman's teachings from a Barco family event, where insults to Dmitri met swift, brutal ends. Kevin recalled Roman's advice, learn to judge true worth. Billy fit the profile perfectly. With a grim smile, Kevin resumed, leaving Billy broken amid blood spray. Later, bandaged and slumped, Billy faced Count Bragan, whose rage simmered beneath the surface. Bragan saw the incident as Roman's deliberate provocation to provoke Valhalla emotionally. He resolved to endure, plotting revenge through patience until facing Roman directly. Meanwhile, Roman ended a magical communication with southern Kronos kings, Umberto, Redford, Fronter, agreeing to joint action on Odilia's refugee crisis. Hans entered. Roman stated it was time to meet Count Bragan, a subtle smile indicating full control of the timing. They sat across, tension thick. Bragan commented on the week's delay casually, though anger showed. Roman sipped tea, admitting busyness and suggesting advance notice for future visits. Bragan shifted to Billy's incident, demanding accountability for dishonouring a Valhalla knight. Roman countered that Billy struck first. Bragan insisted on status difference between servant and knight. Roman revealed Hans had been offered nobility for loyal service, but chose to stay as butler, family equivalent in Dmitri house. Bragan pressed that relations with Valhalla demanded consideration. Roman's eyes sharpened. Why should they refrain from touching Valhalla people? Bragan fell silent, sweat forming. Roman dismantled his delusions, recounting Valhalla's festival assassination attempt and follow-up schemes via Kronos. Roman's demeanour grew colder, dark purple aura filling the room with crushing pressure. He challenged Bragan, convince him why execution shouldn't happen here. Bragan appealed to pragmatism. Past enemies needn't be future ones, offering non-interference in Valhalla's civil war, even aid against Kronos. Roman rejected the empty promises. With Kevin's shadow looming, Bragan's pride crumbled to survival instinct. Roman saw no value in letting him live. Far away, Marquis Vella's office bustled until a soldier delivered a wooden box from Count Bragan. Vela smiled, expecting success against Roman. Confidence faded as he opened it. Inside, amid dried bloodstains, lay Bragan's severed head. Silence gripped the room. Vela screamed Roman Dimitri's name in panic. The message was clear: no interest in games from those who sought his destruction. Marquis Belfort entered Valhalla's grand hall carrying a wooden box. He presented it to the Emperor, explaining Roman Dimitri's message. Count Bragan was dead. Roman hadn't just rejected their terms, he'd severed the Count's head and returned it. The Emperor showed no surprise, resting his chin on his hand with detached indifference. The court erupted in outrage. One official demanded immediate military action, crush Duke Vieto's rebels first, then ally with Kronos against Dimitri. Count Gomez of the Conservative Party intervened. He noted Roman's meeting with Sanchez proved his rebel support. Gomez proposed a psychological approach, exploiting Valhalla's pure blood ideology and warrior pride. Public sentiment would turn against rebels if Roman, an outsider, dominated their liberation. Gomez requested permission to contact Roman directly, baiting him into recorded proof of interference that could sway public opinion. Marquis Belfort supported the plan. The Emperor dismissed them with a wave, leaving Gomez with a predatory smile. In a darkened chamber, Gomez activated a communication crystal. Roman's holographic image appeared. Gomez referenced the gift, questioning if brutality defined Dimitri ways, and warning their relationship was irreparably broken. Roman called his words amusing, reminding Gomez that Valhalla attempted assassination first. Compromise was never possible. Gomez acknowledged Roman's rise from Cairo, but warned against overstepping. Gomez activated a hidden recorder, mocking Roman's rebel support as insufficient against Valhalla. Roman countered. What did Duke Vieto's actions have to do with him? He'd already stated his position clearly. Roman dismissed Valhalla's civil war as unimportant. The real issue was their arrogance. Gomez realized the recording captured Roman's personal contempt, not political alliance, useless for propaganda. Roman presented one path to restoration. The Valhalla Emperor must personally visit and seek forgiveness. An official screamed in outrage at the demand. Roman ignored the outburst. Dimitri now officially recognized Valhalla as a hostile state. The crystal went dark. Marquis Belfort acknowledged they'd fallen into Roman's trap. His cunning exceeded simple schemes. Belfort studied the strategic map. Kingdom of Hector between them would grant Roman passage to Valhalla's northern border. He ordered immediate northern military deployment to avoid a pincer attack with internal rebels. A messenger delivered catastrophic news. Duke Vieto's rebels assaulted Hernan City. The fortified walls lay in ruins as rebels poured through breaches. Duke Vieto led personally, axe-cleaving imperial guards effortlessly. Amid burning streets, Vieto addressed soldiers and citizens. He offered surrender terms, promising to restore Valhalla's true warrior glory, tarnished by the current regime. At rebel suppression headquarters, Count Gomez stared at tactical maps, reeling from Hernan's rapid fall. He ordered mobilization of Valhalla's top warriors, except Caesar by the Emperor, to crush the rebellion decisively. He identified Buleras as Vieto's main threat. Concentrating elite forces offered quickest victory. A night burst in. Top warriors couldn't mobilize. They'd been summoned to a decisive battle. Gomez paled. Valhalla's sacred tradition bound top warriors to death matches, superseding military orders even during war. He demanded who initiated it. The night revealed Ars, third-ranked, challenged Alvarez, second-ranked, to battle. Gomez stared blankly. Valhalla's two greatest assets would fight each other to the death, removed from battlefields precisely when Roman's war declaration activated. Perfect chaos at the worst moment. An imperial summon was issued, and the strongest fighters of Valhalla gathered in the capital. But this meeting didn't feel normal at all. There was tension in the air, and everyone knew the reason behind it. Roman Dimitri. Alvarez, the rank 2 fighter of Valhalla, looked around in frustration. To him, this wasn't the same Valhalla anymore. One by one, their strongest warriors had fallen. Morales was gone. then Barbossa, and even Roderick couldn't survive. And on top of that, Ares, who was rank 3, had chosen to follow Roman Dimitri and left Valhalla behind. For them, this situation was completely unacceptable. Just then, the doors slowly opened, and Ares himself walked in. He looked completely calm, as if nothing had changed. He casually greeted everyone, which only made the situation more tense. Alvarez immediately got irritated. He couldn't understand how someone they considered a traitor could walk in here with so much confidence. But Ares didn't see himself as a traitor. As far as he was concerned, he was still rank 3 of Valhalla, and without wasting any time, he directly challenged Alvarez to a deciding duel. The entire room went silent. A deciding duel wasn't just a normal fight. It was a sacred tradition among the top-ranked fighters. Some of the members tried to interfere, especially those ranked below Ares, but he made it very clear that no one below his rank had the right to step in. This wasn't something they could interrupt. After a brief moment of silence, Alvarez accepted the challenge. The scene then shifted to the Valhalla temple, where the duel was about to begin. As both fighters stood facing each other, Alvarez spoke confidently. He reminded Ares that history always repeats itself and that Ares had already lost to him multiple times before. But instead of reacting, Ares simply smiled, as if none of that mattered anymore. The duel finally began, and in the very next moment both of them rushed forward. Their swords clashed again and again, creating powerful shockwaves. The intensity of their exchange left the spectators stunned. Even though Ares was holding his ground, most of them still believed that Alvarez had the upper hand. Alvarez admitted that Ares had improved a lot, and his swordsmanship was impressive. But according to him, the difference in their aura was something that could never be overcome. To prove his point, he launched a powerful attack. For a moment it looked like his sword had pierced through Ares, but it turned out to be just an afterimage. Ares had already moved. Seeing this, Alvarez realized that he could no longer hold back. He decided to end the fight with one final attack. His aura suddenly exploded, filling the entire area with overwhelming pressure. The spectators were forced to step back because of the sheer intensity. Then, Alvarez used his secret technique, explosion smash. The attack landed perfectly, and for a moment, he was sure that he had won. But the next second, something unexpected happened. From within the smoke, Ares walked out, completely unharmed. Before anyone could even react, Ares counterattacked instantly. His strike was fast and precise, and it was fatal. Alvarez's swords fell to the ground, and in the very next moment, even his arm was severed. Blood spread across the battlefield, and shock filled the faces of everyone watching. That's when the truth was revealed. Ares had reached an entirely new level. He had become a 6-star swordsman. From the very beginning of the fight, he had been holding back his true power. What followed was pure domination. Ares continued attacking without giving Alvarez any chance to recover. The spectators couldn't believe what they were seeing. The man they thought would win was completely overwhelmed. At the same time, one of the observers finally understood what was really going on. This wasn't just a random fight. This was part of Roman Dimitri's plan. He had already sent his forces to the northern front to separate the Emperor's army, and now he had used Ares to eliminate Alvarez. Everything had been calculated from the start. Realizing this, panic began to spread among them. They understood that if this continued, they would keep getting controlled by Roman strategies. Left with no other option, they decided to abandon their own principles and take immediate action. An order was given to arrest Ares right then and there, but surprisingly, no one moved. Because deep down, everyone already knew things were no longer under their control, and with that, the balance of power had completely shifted, and this was only the beginning. Before the journey even begins, we hear the words of a man who already understood how dangerous this place had become. A loyal retainer recalls what his lord told him right before leaving for Valhalla, and those words don't sound like motivation. They sound like a warning. He says Valhalla has completely lost a warrior's pride. Think about that. A land built on strength, discipline, and respect for combat has now turned into something far darker. And then comes the most chilling part. He warns that even if someone wins a duel, even if they prove their strength fairly, there's still a chance they'll be attacked afterward. That's how broken the system is. Winning doesn't guarantee safety anymore. In fact, it might make you a target. And with that, the story sets a tense and uneasy tone, like something terrible is waiting just around the corner, and then suddenly everything explodes, not with battle, but with news. Ares has won. The duel of decision is over, and the result spreads across Valhalla faster than anyone could have imagined. This isn't just some quiet announcement either. It's broadcast using a magical communication device, meaning everyone sees it, everyone hears it, and no one can ignore it. Ares, a name that many didn't take seriously before, has now climbed to the position of the second strongest in all of Valhalla. That's not just impressive, that's terrifying. The reactions are immediate and intense. Some people are in complete shock. How did someone so young reach this level? Others are angry, especially those who feel their own positions are now threatened. You can almost feel the jealousy and fear mixing together. But at the same time, there are those who feel something different, pride. To them, Ares represents something rare, proof that raw talent and determination can still break through even in a corrupt system. But Ares doesn't stop to enjoy his victory. He doesn't celebrate, he doesn't hesitate. Instead, he does something that instantly shakes the entire power structure of Valhalla. He issues a challenge, not to just anyone, but to the very top. Caesar, the #1 ranked warrior, the man known as Valhalla's strongest swordsman, a figure whose reputation alone is enough to silence a room. And now, Ares is standing there, openly declaring that he wants to fight him. This isn't just bold, it's explosive. And just like that, the entire political landscape is thrown into chaos. Nobles, officials, and warriors begin arguing, debating, analysing every possible outcome. Some insist that Caesar's experience and reputation make him unbeatable. Others aren't so sure anymore. Because Ares isn't just some lucky challenger. He has already reached the 6-star aura realm. That level of power isn't normal. It's the kind of strength that can change the outcome of a battle, no matter who stands on the other side. And suddenly, the impossible doesn't seem so impossible anymore. But just as tensions reach their peak, the story takes a sharp turn. Because while Valhalla is busy arguing about duels and rankings, war has already begun. An urgent report arrives like a thunderclap. Dmitri has launched an attack on the northern front line, and far earlier than anyone expected. There's no time to prepare, no time to debate. The enemy is already moving. And this isn't a small force. An army of 100,000 soldiers is advancing toward Valhalla's most important defensive position. 100,000. Just imagining that number is enough to understand the scale of what's coming. This isn't pressure. This is overwhelming force. But the real danger isn't just the number of troops. It's who's leading them. Among the attackers are elite mages, flare mages and phoenix mages, specialists in destruction. Their strategy is brutally efficient. First, they unleash long-range magical bombardment to weaken the fortress. Then, once the defences start to crumble, the main force moves in for close combat. It's a perfect combination of range and power, and then comes the moment that makes everything worse. Felix steps forward, a master of the Phoenix Magic Tower, and with absolute confidence he declares that bringing down Valhalla's walls will take just 1 hour. 1 hour, not a day, not a prolonged siege, just 1 hour to destroy defences that were meant to protect against massive invasions. The defenders hear this, and for the first time real urgency sets in. This isn't a battle they can casually hold, they're already on the clock. Still, Valhalla doesn't stand defenceless. The Mountain Magic Tower takes charge of the defence. Their specialty is protection, reinforcement and endurance. Their master, Uir, leads a group of 100 mages, all focused on one mission: hold the line, block incoming attacks, strengthen the fortress. Buy as much time as possible. They estimate they can hold out for about 10 days. 10 days until the enemy can fully take control of key territory like Hernard. 10 days. Sounds like a plan. But plans don't always survive contact with reality. The attack begins. The sky erupts as waves of magical energy crash down onto the fortress. Explosions shake the ground. The defenders immediately activate their strongest protection, the stone shield, a massive magical barrier designed to absorb and resist even the most powerful attacks. At first, it works. The shield holds. For a moment it feels like, maybe, just maybe, they can survive this. But then, the attackers reveal something that changes everything. Dispel. A counter-magic designed to erase other magic completely, and its strength depends on one thing, the power difference between the caster and the target, and that's where the defenders realize they're in trouble. The enemy's dispel is faster, stronger, more precise. 50 mages working together with perfect coordination, tearing down magical defenses piece by piece. The defenders try to fight back. They even have more mages, 100 of them, but numbers don't matter when the enemy is simply better. Their dispels are too slow, their reactions too late, and then it happens, the moment that changes everything. The stone shield is destroyed, gone, just like that. A defense that was supposed to protect them from total destruction collapses under pressure, and with it, the confidence of the defenders shatters. Panic spreads, orders are shouted in desperation, emergency weapons are prepared, a flame cannon is brought forward. There's even talk of launching a wide-area multi-dispel to try and regain control. But deep down, everyone already knows the truth. They're losing, and what makes it even more terrifying is how fast it's happening. The attackers didn't just break through, they overwhelmed the defenses in record time, and in the middle of all this chaos, one name stands out. Edwin, a young mage whose growth is described as abnormal, rapid, unnatural. His progress suggests something even more dangerous, that the enemy isn't just strong, they're evolving at a speed no one can match. And that realization hits harder than any attack, because it means this gap will only get worse. Though once known for leadership, he now stood among the Allied forces as a pure mage, fully committed to his role. While Felix prepared overwhelming offensive spells, Edwin focused on dismantling the enemy's foundation, relentlessly casting Dispel to break Valhalla's magical formations. His mental strength expanded outward, directly interfering with the opposing mages. Instead of clashing head-on with destructive power, Edwin targeted their ability to even cast spells. Following his lead, the Phoenix mages synchronized their actions, repeatedly using Dispel to suppress Valhalla's magic before it could take shape. This strategy reflected Roman Dimitri's long-term vision. He had invested heavily in magical development, understanding that future wars would not be decided by brute force alone. Against fortified nations like Valhalla, magic would become the decisive weapon. Through constant refinement, Dimitri's forces had elevated their mages to a level far beyond ordinary limits. As a result, even though Valhalla's wizards outnumbered them, they struggled to keep up. The difference in skill was undeniable. Among them, Edwin Hector stood out the most. His control was overwhelming, breaking defensive spells in moments and forcing multiple enemy mages to focus on him alone, yet still failing to contain him. Despite coming from a nation not known for magic, Edwin's talent had grown to a level that even the highest authorities of magical knowledge had once desired. Each time he shattered the enemy's defenses, Felix and the other mages followed instantly with destructive spells. Their coordination was flawless. Dispel, then destruction. Flames erupted across the battlefield. Explosions echoed one after another, and the once stable magical defenses of Valhalla began to weaken. Smoke rose from the castle walls as the strain became visible. Inside, Hœnir urgently commanded repairs, trying to stabilize the collapsing defenses. He had been confident that the walls would hold without fail, but in less than an hour, that certainty was shattered. Valhalla's mages desperately poured their energy into maintaining the barrier, working together to restore what had been broken. Yet under Edwin's leadership, the relentless pressure continued. Piece by piece, their defenses were worn down. Then, finally, the wall collapsed. The impact shook the battlefield as the fortified barrier gave way, just as Felix had predicted. The path forward was now open. At that moment, the command rang out. Advance. The Allied armies surged forward without hesitation, charging through the breach with overwhelming momentum. The battle had reached a turning point. Now, It was Roman Dimitri's move. Elsewhere, Count Gomez pushed forward with growing urgency. News of the northern front being attacked had unsettled him. Roman Dimitri's actions were far bolder than expected. Even with a massive force and the support of Valhalla's elite mages, Gomes believed the defence should have lasted at least 15 days. To him, the real deciding factor lay elsewhere, the outcome of the clash between Ares and Caesar. If Ares were to win, the situation would spiral beyond control. Still, Gomes held on to one assumption. With the Marquis of Killian and the mountain's mages guarding Valhalla, its fall should not come easily. He had not yet realized. The collapse had already begun. At the Temple of Valhalla, Ares stood still, waiting. He had already issued his challenge to Caesar, and now, under the watchful eyes of countless spectators, he remained calm and unmoving. The area was overflowing with people. What began as a staged gathering had turned into a massive crowd as rumours spread, drawing in citizens from all sides. Voices filled the air. Most believed Caesar would win without question. Others hesitated, recalling how Ares had already defeated Alvarez, something no one had expected. The uncertainty only fueled the tension. Through the dense crowd, Count Gomez made his way forward and took his reserved seat. His expression remained controlled, but his thoughts were restless. For Valhalla, this fight could not end in defeat. It wasn't just about Ares winning or losing. If Ares, who once failed to surpass Alvarez, had now risen to challenge the very peak after joining Roman Dimitri, then the meaning was clear. The credit would not belong to Ares alone. It would prove that Roman Dimitri had elevated him to an entirely new level, and that truth was difficult to ignore. Roman had already reshaped the very foundation of swordsmanship, surpassing even legends of the past. If Ares succeeded here, it would only strengthen that narrative. Then the moment arrived. The crowd split apart. Caesar appeared. Every step he took drew complete attention. Unlike the rough and imposing warriors of Valhalla, his presence was composed, almost refined. His appearance was clean and orderly, closer to that of a noble than a battlefield fighter. Only the massive claymore resting on his shoulder revealed his true nature. The weapon looked heavy and unforgiving, something no ordinary person could even lift, let alone wield with ease. He stopped in front of Ares. A faint smile formed on his face. He spoke as if recalling an old memory. 10 years ago, their paths had crossed. At the time, Ares was already a promising warrior, and for a brief moment he had the chance to learn from Caesar, the strongest swordsman in Valhalla. It had not been a formal bond of master and disciple, but Ares had respected him deeply and listened to his guidance. That short encounter had made one thing clear. The gap between them was overwhelming, and in Caesar's eyes that gap still remained. He spoke with confidence, even regret, suggesting that Ares had wasted his potential by not fully following him back then. To Caesar, comparisons between himself and Alvarez were meaningless. Those who made such judgments simply didn't understand the true difference in power. With a single motion, he loosened the strap of his claymore and took it in one hand, as if its weight meant nothing. The atmosphere shifted instantly. A quiet pressure spread across the area. Caesar gave Ares one last chance. To kneel, admit his mistake, and swear loyalty to Valhalla's emperor. If he did, Caesar was willing to spare him for the sake of the empire's future. But the moment the sword was drawn, the answer was already clear. Ares smiled. He acknowledged the past without hesitation. Yes, he had once learned from Caesar. Yes, he had always sought growth, no matter who the teacher was. That had never changed. But neither had his resolve. As he raised his own sword, the air between them sharpened. There was no intention of stepping back. Ares' smile slowly deepened as he faced Caesar. He spoke calmly, but his words carried weight. The time he had spent learning under Caesar had been short, only a few days. For Ares, that was always enough. Whenever he felt he had learned all he could from someone, he moved on without hesitation, and Caesar was no exception. People called him the greatest swordsman of Valhalla, yet Ares had never stayed long enough to be shaped by him. To Ares, growth didn't come from clinging to one master, it came from constantly moving forward. Then his tone shifted slightly. What truly amused him wasn't the past, but the present. Even after all this time, Caesar had remained within Valhalla. Meanwhile, Ares had left and found something far greater in Roman Dmitri. After returning from Arcadia, Ares had only a week to prepare for the coming conflict. It was an impossible task. He was expected to face both Alvarez and Caesar, the two strongest pillars of Valhalla. He intended to carry out the mission alone. But before that, Roman Dmitri called him to the training ground. What stood out immediately was the weapon in Roman's hands. It wasn't the sword he was known for. Instead, he held a pair of ordinary-looking blades. Yet Ares understood instantly. Those swords resembled Alvarez's style. Without wasting time, Roman told him to draw his weapon. From that moment, Roman himself would become his opponent. This wasn't reckless training. It was preparation. Roman knew that Ares's mission required overwhelming strength, not just skill. Instead of pushing him blindly into danger, he chose to refine Ares to the point where success was possible. For Ares, it was exactly what he had wanted, a chance to face Roman Dmitri at full strength. But the outcome was absolute. Again and again, Ares was thrown to the ground. Despite his reputation as a genius swordsman, despite countless battles that had shaped his instincts, he couldn't gain the upper hand even once. Each exchange only widened the gap. Roman's dual sword technique reached a level Ares had never imagined. Every movement was precise, every strike unavoidable. It wasn't just strength, it was control, experience, and something beyond both. At some point, Ares realized something unsettling. He couldn't even picture a way to win. It reminded him of the past, of when he first faced Caesar 10 years ago. Back then, the difference between them had been overwhelming as well. But even then, Ares believed it was a gap that could be closed with time. Caesar was strong, but not unreachable. Roman Dmitri was different. Facing him felt like standing before an endless wall. For the first time, Ares understood that surpassing someone might take not just years, but an entirely different level of existence. Then Roman changed his approach. He switched to a claymore. Even though Ares was already exhausted, he couldn't help but laugh at what came next. Roman said he would now raise the level further and fight him the way Caesar would. That day, Ares experienced something completely beyond his world. And standing now before the real Caesar, that experience had already changed everything. There was no need for further words. At Ares's calm but provocative remarks, Caesar's expression hardened. The brief trace of anger on his face said enough. This was no longer a conversation, it was a test of strength. The priest of Valhalla stepped forward and declared the start of the duel. In the next instant, Caesar moved first. His aura erupted violently as he closed the distance in a single burst, embodying the overwhelming, relentless style he was known for. There was no hesitation in his approach, only pressure, meant to crush his opponent before they could react. But as Ares faced that charge, his mind recalled something else. Roman Dmitri's training. Caesar's strength was built on dominance, constant attacks, leaving no room to breathe. And the answer to that kind of opponent had already been shown to him. Meet force with certainty. The first clash shook the ground. Steel collided with a deafening impact, and from that moment on, Caesar didn't stop. His attacks came one after another, each heavier than the last, each carrying enough force to overwhelm an ordinary warrior instantly. Explosions of aura filled the air. Unlike his fight with Alvarez, Ares unleashed his full power from the beginning. His 6-star aura surged outward, matching Caesar's intensity. Even so, the sheer weight behind Caesar's strikes couldn't be ignored. Every blow rattled his body. And yet, there was no fear. Compared to what he had faced during training, this pressure felt manageable. Caesar was fast. His attacks were powerful, but they were still slower and lighter than what Ares had endured against Roman Dmitri. That difference changed everything. Ares remained calm, reading each movement, blocking with precision. Then, in a brief opening between attacks, he struck back. A single counter. Caesar barely avoided it, but the moment alone was enough to shake him. For the first time, his expression twisted, not from effort, but from wounded pride. He attacked again, even more aggressively. To the spectators, it was overwhelming. Even the rankers of Valhalla, watching the duel, knew they wouldn't last long under such pressure. Caesar's relentless style left no space, no escape, but Ares endured. He was pushed back, his body shaken, blood rising to his throat, but he didn't break. Instead, he smiled. Caesar stood at the peak of Valhalla. His strength was undeniable, but beyond that peak, Ares had already seen something greater. Roman Dimitri. Compared to that overwhelming presence, Caesar's attacks no longer felt absolute. They were powerful, but not unreachable. That realization became Ares' confidence. Enraged, Caesar gathered his mana all at once. The air around him twisted as black and red energy surged violently, wrapping around his blade like a storm. This was no longer a test. It was a killing strike. The ground trembled as the power condensed, lightning-like energy tearing through the surroundings. Die! The attack came down with devastating force, and in that moment Ares looked up calmly. His mind didn't waver. Instead, it returned to the path he had chosen, the teachings he had received. He raised his mana, guided by the Sura method, and for an instant he remembered the ideal that stood far above everything. The heavenly demon sword, a power he could not yet replicate, but one that showed him exactly where to go next. The instant his sword swings forward, a sudden realization reaches him. Without hesitation, he draws upon the heavenly demon sword art and forces a blazing green aura around his blade. Power surges across the steel, expanding into a massive energy edge that illuminates the dark arena walls. Ares had always been praised as a gifted swordsman, but even he had never imagined releasing strength on this level. It is only an imitation of the true technique, a mere shadow of the original art, yet the pressure alone is overwhelming. He gathers everything into one strike. The giant blade of energy crashes downward with enough force to shake the Colosseum. Caesar, caught completely off guard, can only stare as the attack descends. Even though it carries only a fraction of the heavenly demon's real power, it is still more than enough to break through him entirely. The impact explodes across the battlefield. Caesar's defense shatters at once, fragments scattering through the air as he is overwhelmed in a single blow. Silence follows the destruction. Ares looks at what he has done and understands the gap clearly. This is not the true sword art, only a rough imitation, but instead of disappointment he feels excitement. If this incomplete version carries such force, then his own growth has only just begun. Above the arena, a hooded announcer struggles to steady his voice as he reveals the result. Ares has defeated Caesar. With that victory, he rises to first place in the Valhalla rankings. The crowd erupts. Thunderous cheers fill the Colosseum, and through the blue light of the live broadcast, the entire kingdom witnesses the fall of one ruler and the rise of another. Far away, the king of Valhalla watches in silence. The blonde monarch clenches his jaw, unable to hide his anger. Disgust crosses his face as he turns away from the screen before the celebration can continue. His cloak snaps behind him as he leaves the throne room, each step echoing through the corridor. Back in the arena, Ares stands beneath the roar of the crowd, but he shows no interest in their praise. His face hardens. He raises his damaged sword high and calls for everyone's attention. His voice spreads through the Colosseum and across the live transmission. From this moment onward, he declares that he will step down as a Valhalla ranker. The cheers die instantly. Shock replaces celebration. The arena falls into confusion as thousands struggle to understand why the newly crowned #1 would abandon the highest position the same day he earned it. Ares gives them no time to recover. He reminds the Empire that 10 years earlier, Caesar had stood at the summit without equal. Back then, no swordsman in Valhalla could challenge him. But the truth is simple. Since then, Caesar has not advanced at all. The man who once chased greater mastery was slowly consumed by comfort. Authority, political influence, and wealth replaced the hunger that once made him strong. Ares' words strike harder than any blade. He declares that the moment a warrior begins depending on borrowed power, pride starts to disappear. And when pride is lost, the sword follows the same path. Like steel abandoned to rust in the dirt, it eventually breaks apart and becomes worthless. Then his tone lowers. He says Caesar's growth ended the day he abandoned that pride. And because the strongest man in Valhalla stopped moving forward, the nation itself remained frozen beside him. Ares lifts his head again, calm but unshaken. He tells the people they are free to call him a traitor for abandoning the rank he just earned. It does not matter. Pressing a fist against his chest, he speaks the only identity he will ever accept. He was born a warrior, and he will die as one. With complete conviction, Ares admits that only now, standing beside Roman Dmitri, does he feel truly alive again. Having said everything he came to say, he turns his back on the arena. The title, the applause, and the highest seat in Valhalla mean nothing to him now. But before leaving, he gives the Empire one final command: never forget your roots. He reminds every citizen that the blood of warriors still runs through them, whether they acknowledge it or not. His enormous projected image still hovers above the capital, and his voice echoes through the streets. People stop where they stand, staring upward in silence as his message spreads across the city. Many cannot answer the question rising in their minds. When had Valhalla changed? For generations, the kingdom had taken pride in being a nation of fighters. Strength, courage, and discipline were once its foundation. Yet Ares' departure forces everyone to face what they have become. Even the ranking system they honor so highly was built from that same warrior spirit. But Caesar, the symbol of Valhalla itself, has fallen in humiliation before the eyes of the world. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Lucas of the House faction speaks what many already know. If Ares had not chosen loyalty to the enemy of the imperial family, he would have been praised as Valhalla's greatest pride. Instead, a warrior of unmatched talent has rejected the nation entirely. To Lucas, the meaning is obvious. The moment Ares returned, defeated Caesar, and walked away, he proved that his decision to follow Roman Dmitri was the correct one. That realization passes through the streets like a wave. Citizens quietly admit that ever since Ares chose Dmitri's side, Valhalla itself has stopped growing. Then, as uneasy murmurs fill the city, a firm set of footsteps strikes the stone road and silences the noise at once. Lucas steps forward and faces the restless crowd. His voice carries open contempt as he forces their hidden frustration into the open. He asks whether this is truly the Valhalla they are proud of now, a nation where useless men who can barely handle a sword walk with authority as if they own the empire. His words break the last barrier holding the people back. A man from the crowd shouts in response and places the blame directly on the throne. He condemns the foolish 14th prince, saying an ignorant ruler has no right to command the nation simply because stronger figures protect him. The mood in the streets changes at once. Shock and confusion are replaced by anger. Faces harden, jaws tighten, and years of suppressed resentment finally surface. What had once been whispered in private is now spoken aloud without fear. Then those emotions find direction. With Duke Vito already leading resistance against the corrupt royal family, and with Dmitri openly supporting that cause, the citizens begin to believe rebellion is no longer impossible. The fire spreads quickly. People decide they can no longer stand by while Valhalla decays from within. One man raises his voice above the rest and calls for action. If Duke Vito has made his stand, then it is time for the people to risk their own lives for Valhalla as well. Ares' defiance becomes the spark. His victory, his rejection of the ranking system, and his loyalty to Dmitri ignite the hearts of the people and turn growing resentment into open rebellion. Far from the streets, the atmosphere inside Valhalla's command center is far colder. Senior commanders stand over a large war map, studying the sudden collapse of stability across the empire. One strategist admits that he had long expected Roman Dmitri to become a major threat. Now, he says, the situation has passed the point of political conflict. This is war. He warns that whichever side loses its resolve first will be destroyed entirely. Count Gaiman anxiously asks if that means they will have to abandon the northern front. The strategist corrects him at once. They will not give it up completely, only sacrifice part of it. He explains that Dimitri's plan is clear. Ares has been used as a decisive weapon to occupy Valhalla's highest-ranked warriors. While the Empire's strongest fighters are distracted, Dimitri can pressure the north and prevent the army from fully suppressing the rebellion inside the kingdom. Even while recognizing the strategy, the commander remains arrogant. He argues that the Allied forces under Dimitri number only around 100,000 soldiers, far too few to topple the Valhalla Empire. Marquis Belfair dismisses the northern offensive as a diversion. In his view, Dimitri's true objective is to secretly strengthen the rebellion in Hernand. But Count Gaiman does not look convinced. His unease only deepens. Under growing pressure, he asks the question no one wants to hear. What if Roman Dimitri breaks through the northern defences completely and pushes deeper into Valhalla? A cold smile forms on Marquis Belfair's face. He calmly explains that even if the north collapses, Valhalla still has options. They only need to shift the political balance of the continent in their favour. Count Gaiman immediately understands. Because of the current truce, the Kronos Empire cannot openly join the war, but they can still move their forces toward the Cairo border and create enormous pressure through threat alone. If that happens, Dimitri will be forced to divide his attention. Relief replaces Gaiman's fear. He praises Belfair's thinking and calls it the perfect solution for Valhalla. But before their confidence can settle, the doors of the command centre burst open. A messenger rushes inside with an urgent report from the northern front. His expression alone is enough to silence the room. He tells Belfair that the situation is too serious for words and that he needs to witness it himself. At the centre of the chamber, the blue communication crystal activates. A live projection appears above it, but instead of an orderly battlefield report, the image shows a wounded northern commander barely able to stand. Covered in blood and shaking with fear, he forces out a final message. The north has already fallen to Roman. The moment he finishes speaking, his body collapses. Then a figure steps forward from the darkness behind him. Roman Dimitri enters the crystal's view. His presence alone changes the room. Calm, cold, and completely in control, he looks directly into Valhalla's command centre through the projection. Roman says Marquis Belfair is a disappointment. He reminds them that Count Bragan's severed head was sent as both a warning and a message. Yet despite that, this weak resistance is all Valhalla had prepared. The faces of the strategists turn pale. Only now does the truth fully strike them. The northern line was not merely attacked. It has already been conquered. Roman remains composed as he delivers his next words with absolute certainty. He has no interest in prolonging the war. If they drag the Emperor of Valhalla before him and force him to kneel immediately, then he will end the conflict. The insult shatters Belfair's restraint. He explodes in rage and shouts back at the projection. Pointing at the crystal, he reveals what he believes is Valhalla's hidden advantage. Kronos forces are already gathering at the Cairo border. Whatever Roman plans, he claims, will soon become meaningless. He swears to send troops at once, crush the Hernan rebels, and erase Dimitri from the continent entirely. Belfair continues shouting in fury. He declares that Roman will soon learn the fear of facing two great powers at once. When Kronos and Valhalla move together, he claims, no force on the continent will be able to resist them. Roman shows no reaction. He calmly steps over the broken armour and bodies scattered across the captured northern battlefield. His voice returns through the crystal as cold and steady as before. He says he has heard Valhalla's intentions clearly. Then a faint smile appears on his face, not from concern but amusement. To Roman, the threats coming from the command room mean nothing. Standing in the aftermath of total victory, he looks directly into the projection and mocks Belfair's confidence. He admits that even he had not expected Valhalla's northern defences to collapse so easily. Their carelessness, he says, has opened the road for him. Roman makes it clear that he will continue advancing without pause, cutting through every obstacle until the war is completely decided. He tells Belfair to keep that same arrogance until the very end. A heavy killing intent spreads around Roman's figure, so intense that even through the projection it sends fear into the command room. Belfair, moments earlier full of confidence, now stands drenched in sweat. Roman's expression sharpens into a grim smile. When everything is over, he promises, they will meet him face to face, and this time, no distance or strategy will protect them. The communication has been cut, the room is silent, and the reality of the situation is settling in like cold iron. Marquis Belfair and Count Gomez are not men who break easily, but right now neither of them is hiding it. They're rattled. Gomez lays it out plainly. 100,000 troops pushing toward Valhalla's capital should be impossible. By any conventional measure it is. But Roman Dmitri doesn't fight by conventional measures. The man carved his legend in the war with Kronos, capturing fortified positions that should never have fallen, leaving nothing behind but ash and reputation. Even if his force is small, Belfair and Gomez know the damage he would inflict before anyone could stop him would be catastrophic. Belfair reaches his decision. There's only one move left. He has to go directly to the Emperor. In the Valhalla Empire, there is one rule above all others. You do not seek an audience with the Emperor unless he calls for you. Those who have broken that rule in the past didn't get the chance to regret it. Belfair and Gomez know this. They walk into the Imperial Palace anyway. The throne room is vast and cold. The Emperor is somewhere in the distance, draped in indifference. But as the two commanders reach the steps of the throne and drop to their knees, something shifts. The weight of what they've just done crashes over both of them. Sweat soaks through their composure. Their bodies are trembling before a single word is spoken. The Emperor rises. He approaches slowly. His footsteps echo through the hall with quiet, deliberate menace. He speaks Belfair's name. What follows is not a trial, it's a statement. Before Belfair can even finish answering, the Emperor strikes him. A backhanded blow so forceful it snaps his head sideways and rings off the stone walls. Then a second strike, then a third, each one harder than the last, until Belfair is coughing blood on the floor of the imperial throne room. Count Gomez watches in silent horror, unable to move. Standing over the broken marquis, the Emperor doesn't rage. He's almost calm, and that makes it worse. He reminds them both why they were given power in the first place, so they wouldn't become a burden to him. And yet here they are, crawling into his presence with news of failure. Then he says something unexpected. He admits he has never truly liked anyone born in Valhalla. Their warrior pride, their ancient traditions, their talk of strength and honor. He calls it the noise of people who are too weak to face reality. What comes next is the chapter's most revealing moment. The Emperor confesses that when he looks at Roman Dmitri, he is reminded of something from his own past. A time when arrogant voices rejected him, the rightful heir, and tried to force him into submission under the weight of imperial tradition. He hated those people. But Roman Dmitri, a commoner from the Empire's outer rim who has built himself into Valhalla's most dangerous enemy, the Emperor doesn't hate him the same way. He almost respects it. He says Roman has grasped the true, ruthless nature of what Valhalla is, better than most people born inside it ever did. That dark amusement lasts for exactly a moment. Then the Emperor snaps. Another brutal flurry of strikes rains down on Belfair, and somewhere in the middle of it a new strategy takes shape in the Emperor's mind. His order is short and absolute. March on Hernard. Leave no one alive. Belfair and Gomez, barely able to stand, shout their obedience and scramble to carry it out. The Emperor covers his face with one hand, smiling. He poses one final question to the empty room, to Roman Dmitri, wherever he is. What will your choice be? The next morning, Valhalla's war machine is already moving. One of the continent's most powerful armies marches straight for Hernard, and every step of it is reported directly back to Roman Dmitri. Inside his command tent, his second-in-command, Chris, raises the obvious concern. They know the Imperial army is coming. Is Roman certain he wants to continue? Roman doesn't hesitate. He explains it clearly. The moment he took Count Brigand's head, he stepped into a game with only two outcomes. There's no retreating from this. Without Dmitri's military pressure, the Hernard rebellion collapses. And if Hernard falls, Roman finds himself trapped between two massive empires simultaneously, Valhalla and Kronos, with no room to breathe. This war, he tells Chris, runs entirely on momentum. The side that stops first loses everything. He leans over the war map and points to 3 territories, Lunos, Port Bell and Santino. These 3 strongholds form the shortest path to Valhalla's capital, and beyond Santino sits something even more valuable, a major warp point that would give Dmitri instant strike capability anywhere within Valhalla's borders, including the capital itself. His timeline: capture all 3 within 1 week, and they become the most dangerous force Valhalla has ever had to face. Roman's expression doesn't waver. He's already issued his silent challenge to the Emperor. Now he waits to see if the Emperor truly understands what he's walking into. The scene shifts to Lunos. Viscount Lunos stands on his fortress walls, watching Roman's army arrive. He has direct orders from the Emperor. He doesn't need to win. He just needs to hold long enough to buy the capital a few extra days. But day 1 passes. No siege. Roman's army simply camps outside the gates. Soldiers queue for hot meals and rest in shifts. It's almost relaxed. By day 2, Viscount Lunos is losing his composure. Why aren't they attacking? Is this even a siege? He tries to rationalize it. No army of 100,000 can realistically take an empire. There must be a limit to what Roman can do. Then a messenger arrives, gasping for breath. Port Bell is under attack by Roman himself. Right now, Port Bell is located entirely behind Lunos's position. If Roman is personally leading an assault there, then what exactly is the army camped in front of the fortress walls? The realization hits like a physical blow. Lunos had been watching a decoy the entire time. 3 days earlier, inside the rebel camp, Duke Vieto received the news of the Northern Front's collapse and the deaths of Alvarez and Caesar. The losses are severe. But one of his commanders, Sanchez, a follower of Morales, isn't surprised. He had predicted Roman's return. He reminds the Duke that even when the Valhalla imperial family sent assassins after Roman, the man came back on his own terms, victorious. Duke Vieto refocuses on their role in all of this. The rebellion cannot topple Valhalla by force alone. What it can do is spread truth, show the people of Valhalla that change is possible, that the imperial family's grip is not unbreakable. Every day they hold out, the message gets louder. With Roman keeping the imperial army occupied, the emperor can't dedicate his full focus to crushing them. If the rebels can survive 15 more days, Vieto believes the people will rise. But the emperor of Valhalla has already made his own calculation. Having abandoned the northern front entirely to Roman's advance, he redirects a staggering 1,000,000-strong army, led by his personal elite force, the Royal Knights, directly to Hernard. The intent is total annihilation. Not a siege, not a negotiation. The complete and permanent end of the rebellion. A Hernard commander looks at the incoming force and can barely form the words. How are they supposed to stop that? The answer, for now, is that they can't. 2 generals, 2 colossal armies. And in the middle of it all, Roman Dmitri playing a game of war that nobody else has fully read yet. The emperor thinks he's closing the trap. Roman thinks he's already sprung his. Which one of them is right? An ocean of silver and black armor stretches across the horizon, a seemingly endless column of imperial soldiers marching in perfect formation toward the fortress of Hernard. At the head of this procession, the emperor's elite royal knights lead the advance, their golden banners snapping violently in the wind. Standing on the battlements, Duke Vito takes one long look at the approaching force and goes quiet. His veteran's eye does the cold math immediately. Their numbers easily push past several 100,000, and at the front, that golden standard confirms the worst. The Royal Knights have been fully mobilized. Beside him, Sanchez breaks into a cold sweat, confirming what the intelligence reports already warned. This is the Emperor's entire army. The picture sharpens quickly. The Emperor of Valhalla has not split his forces to deal with the threat on the northern front. Instead, he has committed everything, a force of over 1 million, to crush the rebellion at Hernard before Roman Dmitri can arrive and complicate the situation. Duke Vito understands the logic immediately. This isn't just a military campaign. This is a preemptive extermination. The Emperor wants the rebel army gone before any unpredictable variables enter the equation. He wants it over fast, and he wants it permanent. The Duke does not flinch outwardly, but the numbers are beyond argument. His own force of 200,000 has no realistic path to surviving a 1 million-strong imperial assault, let alone holding for the 15 days the rebels originally planned. The grim question forming in his mind isn't whether they can win, it's whether they can survive even a single week. The tense standoff shatters without warning. Massive fireballs arc into the sky from Hernard's siege weapons, leaving trails of scorching light as they crash into the fortress's magical barrier. The ground shakes. The air fills with heat and noise. Duke Vito steadies himself against the shockwaves, watching the defensive barrier absorb blow after blow, and wondering how long it can last. The answer comes quickly. The Emperor hasn't just sent soldiers and siege weapons. Emerging from the imperial ranks are the vagabond mages, dark-robed practitioners from one of Valhalla's most feared magic towers. Duke Vito can barely believe the Emperor would deploy them here, but there they are. The vagabond mages raise their hands in unison and release a combined assault spell, a catastrophic mixture of lightning, driving rain and a howling wind field that hammers into Hernard's magical barrier with devastating force. Sanchez and Duke Vito are physically shoved back by the pressure. The barrier begins to strain. Duke Vito arrives at a grim conclusion. Under this level of continuous magical bombardment, the fortress will eventually fall. It is only a matter of time. Sensing the defense beginning to buckle, the Imperial Vanguard commander signals his advance. Count Gomez personally orders the ground troops forward. Siege ladders crash onto the fortress walls. The swarm reaches the gates. Duke Vito screams at his men to hold the line because they have no other choice. If Hernard falls, the rebellion ends here. The future they're fighting for dies with it. The scene cuts away from the chaos of Hernard, far away to where the real gambit is unfolding. 6 days into the diversionary operation, Roman Dimitri's forces have arrived at the fortress of Santino. Roman doesn't bring out a siege engine. He doesn't form his troops into attack formations. He simply walks up to the base of the fortress wall alone, states his name clearly, and issues a direct challenge to the Lord of Santino, a one-on-one duel. High on the battlements, Count Santino's face goes pale. The rumours about this man are not rumours. Even among the elite warriors of Valhalla, Roman Dmitri is known as the man who killed Barbossa single-handedly. Santino knows, with absolute certainty, that stepping outside those gates to face Roman in a fair fight would mean his death. He refuses. He shouts down that Roman's intentions are obvious, a quick psychological trick to end the siege early, and that he won't fall for it. He's buying time. He's hoping Roman goes away. Roman doesn't go away. He mocks the Count openly. He calls out the entire empire, asking out loud what has happened to Valhalla's famous pride as a nation of warriors who never back down from a challenge. Then he raises the stakes. He offers to fight Santino and all of his elite guards at the same time, and promises he won't take a single step back from where he's standing. It's a masterclass in psychological pressure, and it works, but not in the way Roman needs. Santino still refuses to open the gates. Roman pauses for a moment, then simply decides to go up himself. He reaches into his cloak, produces a magical scroll, and activates a flight spell. Wings of pure, glowing energy burst from his back, and he launches into the stormy sky, heading straight for the top of the fortress wall. Santino erupts in panic. He orders every archer to fire. A thick storm of arrows fills the air above Roman, but a golden-haired mage at the base of the wall raises her hand and conjures a fire shield that burns through the entire volley before it reaches him. Roman clears the wall and lands. The impact is not subtle. The stone battlements shatter beneath him in an explosion of blue magical energy. When the dust settles, the area around him is wrecked. cratered stone, and the elite guards who were stationed there already defeated. Before Santino can process what just happened, a gloved hand shoots out of the clearing smoke and closes around his face. Roman lifts the Count off his feet with one arm, fixes him with a cold stare, and gives a single order to the surviving soldiers watching in stunned silence. Contact the imperial family and tell the Emperor that Count Santino is in danger. Somewhere deep in a quiet imperial office, a communication crystal begins to glow. Marquis Belelfa, a senior Valhalla official, picks it up calmly and listens as Santino's voice comes through, trembling, barely coherent, describing what has just happened. The mighty fortress has been breached. Roman Dmitri is standing right in front of him. They need reinforcements immediately. There is a long silence on the other end. When Marquis speaks, his tone is not shock. It is not alarm. It is cold, deliberate, and completely unmoved. He tells Santino that imperial reinforcements will only be dispatched after the rebellion at Hernard has been fully crushed. Santino breaks. He begs, he pleads, he demands to know how he's supposed to stop someone like Roman Dmitri on his own. His desperation bleeds through the crystal, raw and humiliating. The Marquis cuts him off, warning him not to test his patience. And then Santino's voice goes silent. A single, brutal strike ends the transmission. Roman Dmitri has ended the Count's life without hesitation. Through the glowing crystal, Marquis delivers his final verdict in a voice that carries no guilt whatsoever. Santino's death, he says, is a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of Valhalla. The Empire did not abandon him. They offered him up deliberately, and Roman Dmitri simply accepted. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Count Santino is alive. Roman Dmitri spared him deliberately, severing the communication crystal before the Marquis of Belfir could order the Count's execution through the link. With that line cut, Santino is confronted with a brutal truth. His own empire had already written him off as a disposable piece. That realization does more damage than any blade could. Stripped of dignity and loyalty in the same moment, Santino collapses into desperation. He begs, he offers everything, his title, his honor, whatever remains, just to stay alive. Roman doesn't answer with words. He throws the man to the stone floor and stands over him with a single cold demand. Give me something worth keeping you alive for. Santino's mind races. He lands on the one card he has left. He reveals classified military intelligence on the Javier Warp Gate, the heavily defended strategic point that Roman's entire campaign is built around capturing. He explains the hidden weaknesses in its magical defenses, troop rotations, and blind spots. He makes the case that without this inside knowledge, taking Javier would be nearly impossible. He finishes, looks up, and with a shaking voice asks if that's finally enough to earn his life. Roman's response is a smile, not a reassuring one. He tells Santino plainly, the information isn't enough. Before the Count can even curse him, Roman strikes. One clean, decisive blow ends Count Santino's story on the battlements of his own fortress. Far from the battlefield in Marin, the capital of Valhalla, something rare is happening. The people have had enough. The desperate resistance of Duke Vieto's rebel army inside Hernard has sent a shockwave through the civilian population. Watching ordinary soldiers fight to the death for a cause larger than themselves lights something in the citizens that propaganda and fear had long suppressed. A massive crowd fills the grand square and begins marching towards the imperial palace. One civilian steps to the front and speaks for all of them. His words are measured but fierce. He reminds the Emperor that Valhalla was built on a warrior's code, on honor, strength, and pride. What sits on the throne now, he argues, is none of that. It is a regime sustained by shadows, manipulation, and the quiet disposal of anyone who asks too many questions. He pleads for a return to what Valhalla actually stands for. His voice carries across the square. For a moment it feels like something might shift. Then the palace doors open. The crowd holds its breath. The civilian leader turns back to the people with a flicker of hope in his eyes, believing the Emperor has heard them. He hasn't. The doors open not to dialogue, but to armoured soldiers moving in perfect formation. Before the civilian leader can finish his sentence, the lead knight steps forward and cuts him down without a word of warning. The knight then turns to the crowd and declares the protesters to be traitors and orders his men to deal with them accordingly. The square turns to chaos. Screams replace chants. The Imperial soldiers move through the defenseless crowd without hesitation. Dying on the cold stone steps, the civilian leader uses his last breath to name what he sees clearly. The Emperor of Valhalla has lost his mind to power. He warns that what happens here will not stay hidden. The rest of Valhalla will see this. The knight ends it with a single stroke. Then he justifies it simply. These were the Emperor's orders. Inside the pristine halls of the Imperial Palace, the contrast is jarring. While blood dries on the Grand Square's stones, Marquis Belfier delivers a tidy, emotionless report. The uprising has been suppressed, and any remaining connections to the rebellion will be tracked down. The Emperor listens from his throne, unbothered. He dismisses the slaughtered citizens as people who forgot their station. When the conversation turns to Roman Dmitri and Duke Vieto's strategy of using public sentiment as a weapon against the crown, the Emperor laughs at it. Not a performance, genuine contempt. He walks down the steps of the throne and reflects quietly. His own brothers once bet everything on the same card. Popular support, moral high ground, the will of the people. It didn't save them. They died for it. Tonight was simply history repeating itself. Then, almost as an afterthought, he gives Marquis Belfier a new instruction: contact Roman Dmitri. A magical projection flickers to life in the hall. Roman Dmitri's face appears, composed, unbothered, with a faint edge of dark humour. He greets the Emperor, noting the timing is convenient. The Emperor narrows his eyes. The projection expands. Behind Roman, the scale of the carnage becomes visible. Valhallan soldiers cover the ground as far as the image can show. Roman smiles at the Emperor across the magical link, letting the sight speak for itself. Marquis Belfier visibly recoils. He stares at the scope of the destruction and quietly marks Roman as something beyond rational calculation. The Emperor, however, laughs. He claps. He openly praises what Roman has done to his own forces, calling it genuinely impressive. He acknowledges that in all the opposition he has ever faced, Roman is the only one who has delivered real, measurable results. He even suggests, half serious, that Roman might have been a natural fit for Valhalla. Then he shifts. The praise becomes a trap. He lays out Roman's entire strategic framework. Take Luenos, Portbell and Santino in rapid succession, force Valhalla to pull its troops back to defend the Javier Warp Gate, and use that pressure to squeeze the Imperial family. Clean, logical, effective, and completely irrelevant, because the Javier Warp Gate no longer exists. The Emperor destroyed it himself. By eliminating their own strategic asset, the Empire has neutralized Roman's entire endgame. Even if Roman takes Javier now, he can't use it. His forces are effectively cut off. The Emperor leans into the projection, eyes lit with something unhinged, and asks what Roman plans to do now that every option has been closed. He closes with a promise. When Roman finally falls, the Emperor intends to be there in person to see it. The transmission ends. The chapter closes at Hernard, where the siege has ground into its 10th brutal day. Count Gomez drives the Imperial forces forward through pouring rain, declaring that today the rebel army ends. Soldiers swarm the fortress walls on siege ladders, and the vanguard begins to pour over the top. Duke Vieto meets them personally. He fights with everything he has, cutting down the first knight before the man can even raise his sword, sweeping through the Imperial advance with the kind of force that comes from someone who has nothing left to protect but the ground beneath his feet. But he knows. The reserves are gone. The losses over 10 days have been too deep. He acknowledges to himself that holding out this long was already a miracle no one planned for. Surrounded, outnumbered, and fully aware that the math no longer works in his favour, Duke Vieto makes his choice. He does not order a retreat. He does not seek an exit. He faces the incoming wave of Imperial soldiers and makes a vow. If this is where he dies, then this is where he dies. He will not turn his back. 2 days into the siege of Hernard, the walls are barely holding. Count Gomez oversees the assault from a safe distance, calm and precise. His Imperial forces have been grinding the rebel defences down with ruthless efficiency. From his perspective, this is not a war. It is a controlled demolition. The rebels inside, led by Duke Vieto, have traded a life of comfort for a fight they cannot win, and Gomez sees no reason to rush what is already decided. Then his communication stone lights up, and everything changes. An urgent transmission comes through, carrying an order Gomez cannot make sense of. Withdraw part of his forces from the siege, immediately. He pushes back hard, arguing that pulling troops now would be handing the barely alive rebels a miracle they have done nothing to earn. But the voice on the other end isn't asking. It belongs to the Emperor himself. The message is simple: obey or face the gallows. Gomes screams into the void as the transmission cuts off, demanding to know what could possibly justify abandoning a victory already in hand. The story rewinds to explain why the Empire is suddenly in a panic. In the grand central plaza of Marin, Marquis Belfier stands over a kneeling prisoner. The square is packed with citizens, surrounded by armoured imperial knights. Belfier is making an example, a public execution meant to crush any remaining spirit of dissent. He delivers his judgment coldly, reminding the crowd that treason carries only one outcome. The blade falls, blood stains the stone. He orders the next prisoner brought forward, but before the knight can comply, an emergency transmission intercepts him. His face goes pale as he relays the report to Belfier. Coordinated attacks have erupted across Valhalla simultaneously. Roman Dmitri has been moving in the shadows, and the Empire is under assault from within. The scene shifts east to the city of Cairo. A team of cloaked operatives moves across rooftops in silence. Their target is the Cairo Armory, a fortified imperial building guarded by fully armoured knights who have no idea they are already dead. The strike is swift and without sound. The guards are neutralised before they can raise an alarm. A magical explosive device is attached to the iron doors, armed with a single click, and the operatives dissolve into the shadows. The explosion tears apart the night sky. Flames pour out of the armory, lighting the street below in orange and red. Citizens pour out of their homes in confusion and fear, and then 3 cloaked figures step into view. They do not hide. They speak directly to the crowd, reminding them of the innocent people slaughtered in Marin simply for speaking uncomfortable truths, warning that none of them are safe under the current emperor, urging them to stop waiting for rescue and take their homeland back themselves. The fear on the faces in the crowd slowly hardens into something else. Imperial reinforcements arrive, and the Knight Commander orders his men to pursue the operatives at all costs. The lead operative glances back, unbothered. Then, in a single explosive burst, the agents vanish into the alleyways using high-level movement techniques, leaving the knights standing in an empty street, baffled. These are not ordinary rebels. They are elite agents of the House Sect, masters of martial arts who have been operating in Valhalla's blind spots. Far from the chaos, Roman Dmitri sits motionless on a throne in the quiet city of Javier. His aide, Chris, stands at his side. A holographic battle report comes in. The psychological operation is working. Rebellions have broken out across eastern Valhalla. The northern granaries are on fire. The Empire is losing control of its own population. Chris notes that the Emperor has permanently lost the trust of his people, but then raises a tactical concern. If Valhalla can prove that Romans secretly orchestrated these uprisings, they could flip the narrative and use it to unify the public against him. Roman dismisses it without blinking. His calculation is different. The citizens are past the point of caring who lit the fire. They are already burning. What matters now is how the Emperor responds to the pressure. And Roman already knows how a cornered, unstable ruler responds. Chris hesitates, expressing unease about the civilian cost of this strategy. Roman cuts it off cleanly. Valhalla is not his nation. Dmitri's future is the only priority. He instructs Chris to activate the secondary plan they had prepared in advance. A cold smile crosses his face. The Emperor once wanted to know what Roman Dmitri was truly capable of. Now he is finding out. Inside Valhalla's imperial court, the reports arrive in waves. Armories destroyed, granaries burning, rebellions spreading. Commanders argue that they have no choice but to pull forces from the front just to stabilize the interior. One official stops and does the math, and the result is paralysis. If the army retreats, the Empire loses its grip on both the north and Hernard. If it doesn't, the interior collapses. Before anyone can decide, a knight bursts into the hall. Roman Dmitri is requesting a direct communication. Marquis Belfier steps forward to take the call, with the Emperor watching silently in the background. Belfier challenges Roman directly, warning that his actions are pushing the Empire toward total war and that the rebels in Hernard are already on the edge of collapse. Roman is unmoved. He confirms the two nations are now permanently on opposite sides of a line that cannot be uncrossed. Belfier presses harder. The rebels will be finished before sunset, and Roman's entire strategy has already failed. Then Roman delivers the final blow. He states calmly that he always knew 200,000 rebels could never topple the Valhalla Empire. Belfier goes quiet. Roman continues. Because the task was impossible from the start, he had already decided to abandon the rebels entirely. They were never the point. They were the board he needed to play on. The chapter closes with something far larger than a tactical reveal. Roman's shadow stretches across the landscape, not like a man, but like something ancient and uncontainable. His eyes glow with a pale violet light. His white hair moves in a wind that seems to exist only around him. He sheds every title, every constraint, and announces something that the world of this story has not yet been forced to fully reckon with. He is not simply Roman Dmitri, he is the ruler who once consumed the entire Central Plains with nothing but raw, unmatched force. He is the heavenly demon, and he has only just gotten started. If you want to see how Valhalla respond, and whether the Emperor truly grasps what he has invited into his domain, make sure you're subscribed. The meeting had been going well enough until it wasn't. With a smile that carried no warmth, Roman delivered the news that would shake Marquis Belfier to his core. The alliance with the rebels was over. Not because of betrayal in the traditional sense, but because Roman had never considered it a real alliance to begin with. He laid it out plainly. When he first aligned with the rebel forces, there had been no loyalty, no trust, no shared cause. It was a transaction, nothing more. And now that Hernard was crumbling, that transaction had simply expired. What followed was worse than any outright betrayal. Roman explained with unsettling calm that his true purpose had been to use the stage the rebels created, to grind down Valhalla's military strength from the inside, let both sides tear each other apart, let the casualties mount. Because no matter who fell in the end, the Dmitri kingdom would be the one left standing to benefit. The communication device cut off before anyone could respond. Silence filled the imperial chamber. Then the cold sweat started. Marquis Belfier's mind raced through every decision, every move, every moment he had felt even slightly in control, and the terrifying possibility crystallized. Had they been walking into Roman's trap from the very beginning? Belfier turned to the Emperor immediately, urging a full withdrawal. Pull the troops back, crush the rebellion before the situation deteriorated any further. The other ministers fell in line, bowing in unison, fear written plainly across their faces. The Emperor's response was laughter, not nervous laughter, not the kind that masks fear. Genuine, thunderous amusement that rolled through the stone chamber like something between confidence and madness. He looked at the panicked faces around him and declared that he knew exactly what he was doing, that Roman was unlike any man he had ever encountered in his life, and his eyes carried fascination rather than dread. The troops would not be withdrawn. The order stood. The rebel forces at Hernard were to be wiped out completely. Belfier clenched his jaw and accepted the command. There was nothing else he could do. But before the words had even fully left his mouth, the chamber doors burst open. A guard, breathless and pale, sprinted inside with a single report. Roman had appeared at Marlin, the capital, the seat of the empire, the so-called impregnable fortress. The hall erupted. Ministers exchanged horrified glances. Nobody could explain how he had gotten there so fast or why he had come alone. Outside the towering walls, Roman stood beneath the dark sky, radiating a stillness that felt more dangerous than rage. The guards on the battlements trained their weapons on him and demanded identification. He told them exactly who he was, Roman Dmitri of the Dmitri kingdom. The confusion that followed was almost predictable. A man standing alone before a fortified imperial capital, surely he had come to surrender. The gates, per orders from above, slowly ground open. A messenger cautiously approached and asked why Roman had come. Roman's answer was methodical. Marlin's walls were famous for a reason. High, reinforced, surrounded by layered magic circles designed to disrupt spellcasting. The only reliable way inside was through the warp gate, or by having the gates opened from within. He had considered two options: force his way through the fortress directly, pushing beyond his own limits, or make himself the bait and let Valhalla open the gates for him. He had chosen the second. As he finished speaking, Roman produced a concealed magic scroll from his wrist. The messenger barely had time to shout a warning before the scroll activated. Darkness swallowed everything. The blackout spell, Dark Cloud, erupted outward in every direction, consuming the soldiers before they could react. Within seconds, the entire area outside the gates was wrapped in impenetrable shadow. Guards stumbled blindly. Weapons pointed at nothing. The wall of darkness pressed down on their senses and hollowed out their confidence. One guard tried to hold the line. He reminded the others that Dark Cloud had no direct lethality. It was a visual disruption, nothing more. Keep formation, hold position, wait for the mages to dispel it. He was trembling as he said it. Then the screaming started. One by one, sounds cut through the darkness. Not battle cries, but the kind of sounds that follow finality, the kind that leave silence in their wake. When the Imperial mages finally cast moonlight and pushed back the shadows, the guard found himself standing alone in a field of motionless bodies. Every soldier around him had fallen. The ground was still. The threat was already gone. Inside the audience hall, the atmosphere had collapsed entirely. Ministers muttered in barely concealed panic. Someone pointed out that Ares had already brought down Caesar, ranked first among Valhalla's elite. If Caesar was gone, who was left who could stand against Roman? Belelphia stood apart from them, silent, his heartbeat loud in his own ears. The emperor, however, had not moved. He sat on his throne with that same unsettling smile, as though the situation was developing exactly the way he had hoped. Then a single footstep echoed in the corridor outside. Everyone went still. Roman stepped into the chamber. He scanned the room briefly, noting that no one had fled despite knowing he was coming. He found that mildly interesting. Did that mean they believed they could stop him? He walked forward steadily as he said what he had come to find out. Whether Valhalla truly had the power to prevent a direct assassination attempt from him, he intended to witness the answer himself. The Emperor raised one hand lazily. From the shadows around the throne, a group of hooded figures materialized, cloaked, still, radiating a dark and suffocating aura. The chamber shifted. Even the air felt different. Roman's sword moved before anyone could blink, one clean, devastating slash. The hooded figures came apart instantly, but something was wrong. The Emperor spoke without flinching. Those beings could not be destroyed through conventional force. They were the immortal swordsmen. As his words settled over the room, the severed fragments of each figure dissolved quietly into the air, and then began to reform, piece by piece, back into complete standing forms. Roman had just cut them down without effort, and they were already getting back up. Roman is inside the capital, face to face with the Emperor, and the Empire's final trump card has just revealed itself. Whether immortality is truly a wall Roman cannot break through, that answer is coming. Deep inside the imperial audience chamber of Valhalla, the air itself felt different. Roman Dmitri stood at the center of the hall, completely still, while the Empire's immortal soldiers closed in from every direction. These were no ordinary fighters. They were the backbone of Valhalla's military dominance, warriors who could not be permanently destroyed. And yet Roman didn't move a single step backward. As the soldiers charged, Roman's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. One measured swing of his sword, and the nearest attacker was cleanly bisected before the man even registered the threat. A second soldier lunged from behind, hoping to exploit the opening. Roman deflected the strike without even turning to look, then cut the attacker down with the same quiet efficiency. What made the scene strange wasn't the speed or the precision, it was the calm. Roman watched the fallen soldiers dissolve into particles of light, reform from nothing and rise again, completely restored. He smiled, not with relief, with curiosity. He pressed forward anyway, The next pass was different. Roman didn't wait for them to fully reconstitute. He moved through the chamber like a current, dismantling every soldier in his path and denying them the time they needed to recover. His objective wasn't to destroy them permanently. It was to clear a path. Roman launched himself directly toward the throne, his sword raised high. The stone floor fractured from the force of his leap. For a brief moment, it seemed like the emperor himself would be struck down in his own hall. But the throne was empty when the blade fell. The impact shattered the emperor's seat completely, stone and timber exploding outward across the chamber floor. And just beyond the great doorway, the emperor reappeared for only a moment. His expression wasn't fear, it was amusement. He acknowledged that the encounter had been genuinely entertaining, then vanished entirely. What followed was silence, then chaos. The officials who had built their careers on loyalty to the imperial crown stood paralyzed. Among them was Marquis Belelfir, a man of considerable rank within the empire, and right now, a man who looked like he was trying very hard not to show how frightened he was. Roman turned toward him, unhurried, deliberate. When one of the officials broke down and threw himself to the ground begging for mercy, Roman responded without hesitation, cutting the man down in a single motion. The chamber went absolutely silent. Roman looked at the body with an expression of cold indifference and simply noted that no one had given the man permission to speak. He then turned his attention back to Belelfir. Grabbing him by the throat, Roman spoke plainly. He told the Marquis that pride had been Valhalla's downfall, that if the Empire had ever chosen to honestly face the reality of what was happening in the north, even once, things might have ended differently. Roman gestured around the hall at the kneeling officials and told Belelfir to look carefully. These were the men who had pledged everything to an emperor who had just abandoned them without a second thought. Belelfir was left alive. That, in its own way, was the cruelest choice Roman could have made. Far from the capital, deep within a forest near the northern mountain range, a teleportation circle burned itself into the earth. Roman stepped through, with Nox waiting nearby, visibly exhausted from the effort of maintaining the spell without a proper warp gate. Nox expressed concern that the entire operation had been unnecessarily reckless. Roman, walking ahead without breaking stride, told him the mission was never about killing the Emperor. The real objective had been something far more difficult to undo: doubt. Roman had wanted the people of Valhalla, its soldiers, its nobility, its officials, to understand that the Empire could be reached, that even the Emperor could be made to flee, that the invincibility they had always taken for granted was, in fact, not guaranteed. That kind of damage doesn't heal with more soldiers. It spreads. Back inside the ruined audience chamber, the Emperor reappeared, settling onto the shattered remains of his throne with practiced composure. His expression, however, was cold. He looked at the surviving officials less like allies and more like a liability he was tolerating for now. When Marquis Belelfir bowed and told him they had been fortunate to survive, the Emperor's reply was brief and ominous. He hoped those words were sincere. Then came the new orders. The bulk of Valhalla's military forces were to be redirected. Only a minimum holding force would remain to contain the resistance at Hernard. Everything else was to be focused entirely on Roman Dmitri. Belelfir accepted the command without argument, but privately he understood something that had shifted permanently. The atmosphere in that hall was not the same. The quiet deference that the Emperor had always commanded, the unspoken certainty that Valhalla was untouchable, was gone, and the officials around him felt it too. Roman hadn't just invaded the capital, he had changed what the Empire believed about itself. Meanwhile, on the battlefield at Hernard, the rebel forces were being pushed to their absolute limit. Sanchez stood beside Duke Vito, both of them aware that the situation was critical. Sanchez carried the weight of knowing that the Duke had committed everything to this fight, and that they were close to losing. Duke Vito refused to accept that framing. He told Sanchez to keep fighting and stop treating the battle as already lost. Then, from the enemy camp, a sound cut through the noise. A signal, the order to retreat. The Valhalla soldiers looked just as surprised as anyone. But orders were orders, and they pulled back from the walls without delay. The rebel fighters of Hernard didn't cheer immediately. They stood there, uncertain, processing what they were seeing. Then the understanding settled over them all at once. The siege was over. They had held. The cheers that followed weren't triumphant. They were the sound of exhausted people who had simply survived something they weren't supposed to. Roman's infiltration of the Valhalla imperial capital is complete. The emperor has retreated. The nobility has been rattled. An entire empire now knows that its walls are not as high as they believed. And somewhere in the north, Roman is already planning the next move. The question isn't whether Valhalla will respond, it's whether that response will arrive in time. Duke Vieto stood atop the defensive wall, watching the horizon. The dust rising in the distance told the story clearly. The imperial army was pulling back, column by column, in disciplined formation. Under normal circumstances, watching your enemy retreat should feel like relief. But Duke Vieto wasn't relieved. He was troubled, because a general doesn't abandon a winning position without a reason. The imperial forces had held the momentum throughout this engagement. There was no logical explanation for them to simply stop, turn around, and walk away, which meant the reason existed somewhere else, somewhere outside the battlefield entirely. And that unknown variable was far more dangerous than anything happening in front of him. He called for Sanchez immediately. His orders were direct. Contact their informants in the capital and find out what happened. Something had changed, and they needed to understand it before they could act on it. The informants arrived and delivered their report. When they spoke, the room went still. The cause of the imperial retreat was Roman Dmitri. He had entered the capital of Valhalla alone, not as part of a coordinated strike, not backed by an army. Just Roman Dmitri, moving through the capital on his own terms, turning it into a one-sided slaughter. He had put a blade directly at the empire's throat from the inside, and the chaos that followed was enough to force Count Gomez, who had been coordinating the front-line forces, to issue an emergency recall. The entire imperial army pulled back because one man made it necessary. Sanchez immediately lit up. For him, this was the moment they had been waiting for. Roman had finally acted, and the result was exactly what the rebels needed. He turned to Duke Vieto, clearly expecting to share in the celebration. But Duke Vieto wasn't celebrating, he was thinking. After a long silence, he offered a single observation that cut straight through the excitement in the room. Roman didn't come to help the rebels. He went after the emperor. The capital wasn't a rescue operation. It wasn't a coordinated move in support of their cause. Roman had executed his own objective on his own timeline, and the rebels simply benefited from the fallout. Sanchez pushed back. Even if Roman acted independently, the results still worked in their favor. Abandoning their relationship with him entirely didn't make sense. That was the moment something shifted in Duke Vieto. He began to laugh, not out of relief, not out of surprise, but out of genuine, almost reluctant admiration. The more he turned it over in his mind, the more clearly he could see it. Roman hadn't just abandoned the rebels. He had used the timing of that abandonment as a weapon. He had identified the exact moment the rebel forces would be at their lowest, stretched thin, pressured from all sides, struggling to hold, and at that precise moment, instead of reinforcing them, he turned and struck at the heart of the empire itself. By walking away from the rebels, he cornered the entire imperial family in a single move. The boldness of it, the patience of it, the precision of it. Duke Vieto explained it plainly to Sanchez. This wasn't recklessness, it was a calculation. Roman had seen the board clearly, waited for the right moment, and made a move that no one else would have dared to make. For a brief moment, Duke Vieto saw the shadow of someone he used to know, his old master, in the way Roman had approached this decision. There was no time to dwell on it. The current situation was an opportunity that wouldn't stay open long, and Duke Vieto immediately issued the order. Summon all the rebel leaders. Whatever comes next, it starts now. The Valhalla Empire wasn't only dealing with what Roman had done inside its capital. Far to the west, 3 kingdoms, Redford, Umberto and Frank, had quietly assembled a massive military presence, along Valhalla's western border. The sheer scale of the build-up made it impossible to ignore. Valhalla sent a messenger with all the authority the Empire could project. The message was blunt. Explain the military concentration. If the Alliance had hostile intentions toward Valhalla, the Emperor would not let it stand. Standing across from that messenger was Drake, the Alliance representative. He listened without any visible concern, and when the silence stretched, he responded with complete composure. The kingdoms had gathered for training. It was a routine exercise. Nothing about it was unusual or worth worrying over. The messenger was furious. Even a short time ago, dismissing Valhalla like this would have been unthinkable. The Empire's name alone carried weight that commanders throughout the continent respected. But Drake continued in the same unhurried tone, adding that the Alliance had no interest in crossing into Valhalla's territory and sincerely hoped everything could be resolved peacefully. His expression as he said it was almost pleasant. No one believed a word of it. Valhalla certainly didn't. And that was the entire point. It didn't matter whether the Alliance ever actually invaded. What mattered was that Valhalla now had to treat invasion as a constant, credible threat. Their military attention was fractured. Their resources were being pulled in multiple directions at once. The psychological toll of being surrounded, of waiting for a strike that might come at any moment, was doing its own damage, quietly and continuously. Valhalla had slipped perfectly into the shape Roman had designed for it without ever realizing the trap had been set. Inside the palace, in his private office, Marquis Belfier was not at peace. He had been pacing for some time. The memory of the day Roman invaded the palace kept returning to him, and at the centre of that memory was the moment the Emperor ran, not fought, not commanded the defence, simply ran, abandoning everyone around him to whatever came next. All of Marquis Belfier's years of service, all of his loyalty, all the sacrifices he had made in the name of the Empire, in the name of his duty to the throne. In that one moment, the Emperor had made it clear how much those things were worth to him. Nothing. They were useful while they were useful, and disposable the moment they weren't. The bitterness of that realization had settled into something colder and heavier as the days passed. Belfier's gaze drifted toward the communication device across the room. The imperial family's power wasn't absolute anymore. That was no longer a theory. It had been demonstrated loudly in front of everyone. And if Roman Dmitri couldn't be stopped, then there was really only one rational response left. He reached out and activated the device. He called Roman. Roman answered. He asked without preamble why Belfier was reaching out. Belfier skipped any pretense. He acknowledged plainly that Roman had not spared him out of mercy. There was a reason he was still alive, and he wanted to understand what that reason was. He asked directly what Roman wanted from him. Roman's response gave him almost nothing to work with. Prove your worth. You have 10 minutes. The pressure was immediate and total. Belfier reached for the most valuable information he had. He revealed that the rumours circulating about the Emperor aligning with the Kronos Empire were false. The reality traced back further to the former Emperor, who had specifically arranged for his 14th son to ascend the throne. The reasoning behind that decision remained a mystery even to Belfier, but he was certain the information itself was accurate. Roman was unmoved. He simply asked whether that was everything. Belfier realized quickly that it wasn't enough. He changed tactics. He argued his deeper value. His influence within Valhalla's political structure ran wide and deep. He could actively support the rebellion from the inside. In exchange, he wanted a place in whatever order followed the Empire's fall. He forced confidence into his voice as he made the offer. It wasn't a bad deal. For a moment, it seemed like Roman might engage with it. He acknowledged that Belfier's value was understood. Then he explained that he had never intended to accept it. Belfier was stunned. He pushed harder, listing his connections, his access, his position at the centre of Valhalla's power. Surely that counted for something. Roman dismissed it without hesitation. Belfier was overestimating himself. Then, in steady and measured terms, Roman laid out the truth. There is a clear line, he explained, between people who can still be negotiated with and those who have already gone too far past the point of no return. He asked Belfier which side of that line he stood on. Belfier had no answer. The silence said everything. Roman didn't wait for one. He explained exactly why he had kept Belfier alive, not for his political value, and not out of any potential usefulness going forward. The reason was simpler and more ruthless than that. Belfier's continued existence was enough on its own to plant deep distrust between him and the Emperor. The Emperor would wonder. He would suspect. Every day that Belfier remained alive and unaccounted for, that suspicion would grow. The path back to imperial grace wasn't narrowing. It had already closed entirely the moment Belfier picked up the communication device. And then came the final blow. In 15 days, Roman would send a complete recording of this conversation directly to the Valhalla Emperor. Belfier had no options left. His loyalty to the Empire was already destroyed in the Emperor's eyes. Any attempt to explain or walk back what he had said on that call would only confirm the suspicion. Roman laid it out with cold finality. If Belfier wanted to survive, he had one path forward: use every resource available to him to dismantle the Emperor from within. Otherwise, the recording arrives, and Belfier's fate is sealed regardless. The line went dead. For several long moments, Marquis Belfier stood completely still. Then the weight of it all broke loose at once. Rage, despair, fear, the crushing helplessness of a man who has finally understood, too late, how thoroughly he was outmaneuvered. He hurled the communication device to the floor and destroyed it beneath his feet. Because now he understood what had been true from the very beginning, every step he took leading to that call, every word he chose during it, every calculation he made about leverage and survival. Roman had already accounted for all of it. The conversation wasn't a negotiation, it was a closing statement on a trap that had been set long before Belfier ever reached out.